Hi guys, welcome to Midnight Anime Library. God Level Instructor System, Training Future Admirals One Piece Part 5. Chapter 61, The Stubbornness of the Flower of the Navy. The instructor's berries and warmth under the night sky as the last sliver of the brilliant sunset completely sank beneath the shimmering horizon. The deafening roar of the coastal batteries at Marineford finally came to a halt. All the heavy coastal defense gun barrels were radiating intense heat. A strong, pungent smell of gunpowder permeated the air along the entire coastline. Zooming in, amidst a group of panting and sweat-drenched male soldiers, Guillaume was also dripping with perspiration. A few strands of black hair, wet with sweat, clung to her fair cheeks, rising and falling slightly with her rapid breathing. Unlike the treatment she received during the long-distance run along the coastline this afternoon, she did not sit in the instructor's soft chair under the shade of the trees to rest. Instead, she blended into the ranks, carrying heavy solid iron cannonballs weighing dozens of caddies, gritting her dust-stained teeth, and stubbornly persevering through all the artillery loading drills. This was a stubborn request she had proactively made to Victor before the afternoon artillery class began. Watching monster new recruits like Sakazuki and Borsellino constantly break their limits and grow stronger during the hellish training, proud by nature, she would never allow herself to take privileges for granted and fall behind the others in terms of strength. Facing this deep-seated tenacity and pride in his girlfriend, although Victor felt great heartache, he deeply understood and granted her request. He did not try to stop her again. Instead, throughout the afternoon's training, he stood at the best vantage point, secretly keeping a constant eye on her every move and physical condition, fearing any accidents. Seeing that it was getting late, Victor picked up the whistle on his chest and silently blew a long blast to signal the end of training. Hearing the whistle, which sounded like heavenly music, those usually aloof monster new recruits no longer cared about their image. Their legs gave way one after another, and they collapsed sprawled out on the still warm sand. They gasped for breath, greedily inhaling the fresh air. Taking advantage of the gap while the new recruits were collapsed in rest, with a gentle smile as warm as a spring breeze, Victor turned and walked toward several assistant instructors who had been standing in the scorching sun all day. This naturally included the sweat-drenched and dutiful instructor Kaffa. Victor stepped forward and cordially patted instructor Kaffa on the shoulder. Then, he naturally pulled several thick stacks of berries from his coat and stuffed them directly into the other man's hands. "You've all worked hard today, instructors. Admiral Zephyr was away this afternoon, so thanks to all of you for keeping a close eye on the training here. Take these berries. Take the brothers to a nice place in town tonight for some good wine, a hearty meal, and a good rest." Instructor Kaffa and the others looked at the thick stacks of cash in their hands, suddenly overwhelmed by the favor, and even more sweat broke out on their foreheads. They repeatedly declined verbally. "Oh, Colonel Victor, what are you doing? How can we accept this? Supervising the new recruits is our duty after all." However, despite saying no, their hands were exceptionally honest in their refusal. After a couple of symbolic pushes, they smoothly tucked the stacks of berries securely into their uniform pockets. To take from others is to be beholden to them. When the assistant instructors looked up at Victor again, their gaze had undergone a qualitative change. This young colonel was not only unfathomably strong but also incredibly generous in his dealings. Following such a superior definitely has a bright future. After quietly winning over this group of people, he turned around, faced the corpses littering the beach, and loudly announced that today's hellish training had come to a successful conclusion. "Everyone dismissed. Head to the cafeteria immediately to eat and recover your strength." A wave of weak cheers, sounding like survivors of a disaster, immediately erupted on the beach. The new recruits supported each other, dragging their heavy steps as they trudged toward the cafeteria. Guillaume, dragging her legs that were already incredibly sore and weak, silently followed at the back of the group, preparing to leave. At the moment Victor, pretending to inspect the grounds, brushed past her, the man's footsteps paused slightly, his tall physique perfectly blocking the view of others. While the other new recruits were entirely focused on rushing to the cafeteria to grab food, Victor tilted his head slightly and said in a low voice that only the two of them could hear, "Your performance today was dazzling. This stubborn refusal to lose is exactly what I'd expect from the woman I've chosen." Hearing this heartfelt praise, Guillaume's heart felt a surge of sweetness. However, before she could even show a smile at the compliment, Victor's tone suddenly took on a mischievous edge. But, after pushing yourself all afternoon, your thigh muscles must be reaching their breaking point, right? Take a bath after dinner and come to my dormitory tonight. I have a special medicinal ointment specifically for relieving muscle soreness. Service reserved just for you. These words, thick with suggestion and ambiguity, made Guillaume's breath hitch. On her beautiful cheeks, already flushed from exercise, 2 burning red clouds instantly appeared, spreading all the way to her ears. She didn't dare turn her head to look into Victor's aggressive eyes, and could only let out a guilty, muffled mm. Then, gritting her teeth, she quickened her pace and fled the scene like a startled rabbit. After dinner, the night grew deep. At 9 o'clock in the evening, after being tortured by a full day of high-intensity hellish training, her roommate, Rena, didn't even bother to say a word. After bathing, she collapsed onto the bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep, letting out light snores. Listening to her roommate's steady breathing, Guillaume lifted her quilt and quietly climbed out of her single bed. She took off her slightly oversized pajamas and changed into a pair of soft, form-fitting casual home shorts and a light-colored cotton top. This seemingly casual outfit perfectly showcased her slender waist, straight and long legs, and her beautiful physical proportions. It exuded an unadorned, domestic pure desire style. Walking along the dark, tree-lined paths of the new recruit camp at night, Guillaume was like a cat on constant alert. Relying on her exceptional skills and familiarity with the camp's terrain, she carefully evaded patrols of armed guards. After a tense but uneventful stealthy trek, she finally reached the secluded senior instructor dormitory area. Stopping in front of Victor's familiar door, Guillaume took a deep breath to calm her racing heart. Like a thief, she extended her slender finger and tapped lightly on the wooden door 3 times. Click! The door opened instantly, and before she could react, a strong, warm hand reached out from the gap, grabbed her slender waist, and pulled her directly into the room. As the door was locked behind them, before Guillaume could even see the simple and tidy decor of the room, she had already landed securely in a broad embrace filled with the familiar scent of sea salt and faint tobacco. The flower of the Navy, who had been gritting her teeth on the training field during the day, instantly dropped all her defenses and pretenses in this warm embrace. Like a little girl who had suffered grievances outside, she wrapped her arms tightly around Victor's lean, strong waist. She buried her cheek deep into his chest, letting out a soft sigh full of dependence. Victor chuckled softly, his eyes filled with tenderness. He picked up the beauty in his arms by the waist, walked to the large, soft fabric sofa in the living room, and carefully set her down. Then, he turned and took an exquisite small medicine bottle from the cabinet. It was a high-grade special ointment supplied by Marineford, specifically used for treating severe muscle strain. Victor poured some transparent ointment into his palm. He rubbed his hands together vigorously until his palms were hot, fully activating the medicine's effects. Then, he knelt on one knee on the rug beside the sofa. He gently placed his large hands, covered in warm ointment, onto Guillaume's long, fair legs. Victor began to massage patiently and professionally. The man's pressure was just right. He massaged along the muscle fibers, bit by bit breaking down the accumulated lactic acid. The warm and comfortable sensation spread through her body from her skin, making Guillaume let out a soft murmur of pleasure. She narrowed her eyes contentedly, like a cat being thoroughly petted. In this quiet night where no one else disturbed them, belonging only to the 2 of them, feeling the warmth on her legs and hearing Victor's steady, powerful heartbeat close at hand, Guillaume, who had been exhausted and tense all day, finally relaxed her nerves completely. She lay on the soft sofa cushions, a peaceful and sweet smile playing on her lips. Amidst her boyfriend's gentle massage, she gradually drifted into a deep sleep, entering a sweet dreamland. Chapter 62, The Beauty of Dawn. The Roll King steps forward in Guillaume's rewarded dawn, the horizon just began to show a hint of fish belly white. At this moment, the entire island of Marineford was still shrouded in a thin layer of mist. Guillaume slowly woke up on a wide and soft bed. Her consciousness was still between dreaming and waking. She felt herself being tightly wrapped in an exceptionally warm embrace that exuded a faint scent of sea salt and tobacco. She was deeply infatuated with this feeling of security. Like a lazy little Persian cat, not only did she not struggle to break free, but she obediently nuzzled against the heat source. Dion very naturally stretched out her fair arms and hugged her boyfriend's lean, sturdy waist in return. However, just a few seconds later, her pair of watery, beautiful eyes snapped open, and the sleepiness in them vanished without a trace in an instant. Wait! Her brain began to race. Last night, she had clearly snuck into Victor's dormitory to have him help her massage ointment onto her legs on the sofa, so how did she accidentally fall asleep while he was doing it? This was clearly the large bed in the bedroom. Could it be that she had unknowingly slept here all night? Stayed out all night? Once this thought appeared, Dion's heart immediately became a chaotic mess. A dignified new recruit of the training camp staying out all night. If this were to get out, she wouldn't be able to clear her name even if she jumped into the waters of the calm belt. But then she thought again, when she snuck out last night. Her roommate, Reina, had already fallen fast asleep from the day's training, even snoring slightly. Now that it was just breaking dawn, as long as she hurried back quickly. Even if she were caught by Reina, she could just make an excuse that she got up early to go for a morning exercise by the beach so as not to fall behind. This excuse was simply impeccable. After making up her mind, Dion, swept over by a wave of drowsiness again, let out a long sigh of relief. She closed her eyes again with peace of mind, intending to linger in this warm embrace for a little while longer. Not knowing how long she had drifted in her sleep, the light in the room gradually became brighter. Dion was awakened by an unusual warmth emanating from her chest. She looked down in confusion, only to see that Victor had woken up at some point. His deep eyes held a hint of post-sleep laziness and mischief. This audacious man had even pushed his luck and burrowed into her loose loungewear top. Ah! Dion's face instantly turned bright red, like a ripe red apple. She exclaimed in a mix of shame and anger, quickly reaching out both hands to press down on Victor's fluffy head. She forcibly pulled him out of her clothes, making him behave. It's early in the morning, what are you going crazy for again? Let go quickly, I have to go back now, if I'm discovered later, it'll all be over. Dion complained coquettishly while scrambling to tidy up her clothes, which had been messed up. She put on a normal expression and, with a guilty conscience, pushed open the door of the instructor's dormitory. Taking advantage of the early hour and the lack of people in the camp, she jogged all the way back to her dormitory. After returning to the dormitory, Reina was indeed still fast asleep. Dion let out a long sigh of relief and quickly changed into a crisp, professional Marine Standard training uniform. It must be said that the special ointment from Marineford, combined with Victor's professional technique last night, had an immediate effect. The muscle soreness that had made it almost impossible for her to walk last night had now completely vanished without a trace. Her physical condition had returned to its peak level once again. When the morning assembly whistle blew, Dion, having changed her clothes, appeared on the number 1 large drill ground, looking refreshed, which caused many male recruits to glance at her repeatedly. Admiral Zephyr stood on the high platform, wearing his justice coat, looking dignified and imposing. He announced the day's training content to all the new recruits with a resonant voice: "Brats, pull yourselves together. The morning session will continue to be systematic high-intensity physical training. I want to push your physical limits to the extreme. And in the afternoon, it will be the review and practical assessment of Shave from the 6 powers." Pausing for a moment, a rare smile appeared on Zephyr's stern face. He loudly announced a piece of big news: to motivate you idiots. Whoever performs exceptionally well in the afternoon Shave training and can show me substantial progress will directly receive an honorary medal crafted by my own hands. Once these words were spoken, the crowd below immediately erupted into cheers as enthusiastic as a tsunami. You must know, Fleet Admiral Instructor Zephyr had extremely high standards. Except for when the camp first opened, when he gave out a few small medals to encourage a few outstanding top students, he had not given out any substantial rewards since then. This medal represented the absolute recognition of a former admiral. This rare honor made all the new recruits red-eyed, and they were all eager to give it a try. In the formation below, Dion, having fully recovered her strength and energy, secretly clenched her pink fists. Her beautiful eyes burned with intense fighting spirit, determined to win this medal. The morning's hellish physical training, amidst the loud slogans of the crowd fired up for the medal, passed unexpectedly smoothly. After a short lunch break, the afternoon sun scorched the earth. The number 1 drill ground officially began the specialized training for shave. Although the new recruits were still full of energy, constantly trying to stomp on the ground continuously on the field. However, as an advanced martial art that exceeds the limits of the human body, the 6 powers could not be easily mastered in just a week or two. Continuous failures and falls caused a deep sense of frustration to begin spreading across the drill ground. Just when everyone was distressed, a dull air explosion sound, like a small bomb detonating, suddenly erupted on the quiet drill ground. Bang! Accompanied by this deafening sound, Sakazuki's towering, iron-like figure actually blurred and disappeared from the spot instantly. The next second, he had already appeared steadily on the open ground several meters away, accompanied by a gust of wind. The whole field was instantly silent, followed by an explosion of unbelievable exclamations. This role king who would lock himself in the training ground for crazy extra training even during weekend breaks had actually not used any devil fruit abilities at all. Relying solely on pure physical strength, he had managed to pull off the prototype of shave. Admiral Zephyr, upon seeing this, couldn't help but burst into laughter. He generously praised Sakazuki's perseverance and talent loudly in public. Subsequently, he walked down from the high platform himself and solemnly pinned a shining honorary medal onto Sakazuki's chest. Victor, who was instructing another new recruit on force-generating techniques not far away, saw this scene. A hint of undisguised surprise also flashed in his deep eyes. He was truly worthy of being the future iron-blooded Admiral Akainu, known for his absolute justice. This perseverance to see things through to the end and excellent martial arts talent were indeed extraordinary. Thinking of this, Victor turned his head and cast his gaze toward the other side of the drill ground. He saw Borsellino wearing his signature tea-colored sunglasses, sprawled out on a chair nearby, sitting in a completely unrefined manner. He was humming an unknown tune, looking leisurely as if he had come to the beach for a vacation. Upon seeing this, Victor's face immediately darkened. He had actually walked over and sternly reprimanded this lazy guy several times already. But as soon as he left, this unmotivated yellow monkey would start slacking off again. After all, in Borsellino's logic, no matter how fast one practiced the explosive speed of shave, it could never be faster than the speed of light from his glint fruit. Since that was the case, why should he suffer this thankless hardship and waste effort on martial arts for nothing? Facing this kind of slacker Logio-type ability user, Victor could only shake his head helplessly in the end and stop bothering with him. To be fair, although this guy's logic was infuriating, it did make some sense to a certain extent. After withdrawing his gaze, Victor patiently instructed a few impatient new recruits whose movements had become deformed due to being too eager for quick success. He sternly warned them not to be too hasty. They must control the rhythm of their muscle force generation to avoid causing irreversible meniscus damage. After a round of inspection, Victor finally walked with steady steps to the side of Guillaume, who looked a bit anxious. Facing this official girlfriend who had the closest relationship with him, Victor acted extremely professionally on the drill ground under everyone's gaze. He did not make any improper moves, but instead stared at her movements with a sharp gaze. "Stop." Victor spoke in a deep voice, pointing out her problem with pinpoint accuracy. "When you exert force with your steps, there's a slight deviation in the angle of your ankle, which causes the power to disperse." After saying this, he walked up to Guillaume himself, slowed down his movements, and clearly demonstrated the starting stance of shave and the technique of exerting force with the tips of the toes for her. Guillaume kept her eyes fixed on the instructor's movements, took a deep breath, and calmed her anxious mood. In her mind, she began to quickly recall the times in Office 404. The deep physical memory of when Victor gave her private lessons. After perfectly combining the previous guidance with the demonstration just now, Guillaume closed her eyes and felt it for a second. Subsequently, the muscles in her long, powerful legs tensed to the limit. Her toes kicked the hard ground continuously and rapidly dozens of times in an extremely short period. Swish! Although there was no deafening air explosion sound like Sakazuki's, and it was still far from a standard, perfect shave. But accompanied by a slight sound of breaking air. Guillaume's body indeed turned into an afterimage, instantly shifting forward by a full meter. After steadying her figure, looking at the distance she had crossed, Guillaume couldn't help but let out an excited cheer. This cheer instantly drew gasps of amazement and envious looks from the surrounding new recruits who were still treading water. Ha ha ha! Good! Very good! To be able to achieve this step, your comprehension is also excellent. Admiral Zephyr, who was standing in the distance, also noticed the commotion here. He walked over with big strides, laughing heartily, and looked with relief at this young girl who had always been highly regarded by Vice Admiral Suru. Subsequently, Zephyr generously handed a precious medal into her hand. Guillaume excitedly clutched the medal, which represented recognition, tightly in her palm. She turned around, taking advantage of the moment Admiral Zephyr went to inspect other new recruits. She slightly lifted her stunningly beautiful face, and toward Victor, who was standing behind her, she winked her watery, beautiful eyes in an exceptionally playful manner. The two locked eyes in the sunlight. Although there was no verbal communication due to the occasion, but as an experienced old hand, Victor instantly read the meaning in her eyes from her flowing gaze. Tonight, there's a reward for you. Just when Victor felt his heart heat up from this blatant look, the system in his mind, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly erupted with a crisp, pleasant notification sound. Ding! Detected that the disciple with top-tier aptitude, Guillaume, has significantly deepened her understanding of the advanced marine martial art, 6 powers shave, and successfully executed the prototype of the skill. Triggered the perfect master-disciple critical feedback mechanism. Congratulations to the host for receiving the reward, Grandmaster level 6 powers shave, special attribute, no force exertion. Wind up, no landing stiffness. The host's absolute leg explosive power is permanently doubled. Listening to the heaven-defying reward in his ears. Looking at the bright and moving flower of the navy in the distance, and feeling the terrifying explosive power that had suddenly doubled in his leg muscles. Victor's mouth uncontrollably curled into a deeply meaningful arc. Chapter 63, The Admirals' Drinking Session and Friday's Assessment. Silk under the uniform on the scorching training grounds. With Sakazuki's deafening breakthrough and Admiral candidate Guillaume's stunning performance that followed closely behind, refusing to be outdone. The remaining elite new recruits seemed as if they had been given a powerful shot of adrenaline out of thin air. The morale, previously dampened by successive failures, was instantly ignited, and the training enthusiasm of the entire formation reached an unprecedented high. Sweat soaked through their dark training uniforms, but not a single person stopped moving. Under the influence of this almost crazy atmosphere of intense competition where no one wanted to lose, a miracle really happened. By the time evening approached, a few more new recruits with exceptional physical fitness and talent actually gritted their teeth and successfully stomped out the prototype of sorrow on the hard ground. Their figures created faint air explosions right where they stood. Although the distance was very short, they had genuinely crossed the threshold. Fleet Admiral Instructor Zephyr took it all in, looking at the young faces full of fighting spirit below. The heavy burden that had been pressing on his heart for so long was finally lifted by more than half at this moment. Ha 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 ha. Good. Very good. Zephyr couldn't help but tilt his head back and laugh heartily toward the golden sunset. His booming laughter echoed over the vast training ground, revealing an irrepressible sense of satisfaction. At this moment, he felt incomparably happy and proud of the quality of this first class of the elite training camp. The future of the Marine is, after all, in good hands. Accompanied by the sunset, the arduous physical training session this afternoon finally came to a successful conclusion. Dismissed. Following Zephyr's order, the new recruits burst into cheers of relief. They supported each other in twos and threes, surging like a tide toward the cafeteria. Victor walked down from the high platform with one hand in his pocket and his marine coat draped over his shoulders, his expression indifferent. Just as he was moving with the flow of people, a familiar and graceful figure brushed past him in the crowd. It was Guillaume. She kept her head down and did not deliberately turn to look at him. But in the brief moment their shoulders brushed, she quietly left behind a faint, pleasant scent of begonia flowers. Along with this lingering fragrance came a soft, charming whisper, as thin as a thread, "Tonight, wait for me." Hearing this hint that plucked at his heartstrings like a feather, Victor's footsteps paused slightly. He stood there, watching his girlfriend's graceful back as she walked away with interest. But suddenly, heavy and powerful footsteps sounded in his ears. "Victor! What are you looking at? Let's go, let's go." Zephyr, in a great mood, strode over and unceremoniously threw an arm around his shoulder. Zephyr's stern face was now full of enthusiastic smiles. "These little brats really gave me a big surprise today. Come, accompany me to the instructor's cafeteria private room for a couple of drinks, let's celebrate properly." Facing such an enthusiastic invitation from his immediate superior, Victor naturally couldn't ruin the mood. He quickly reined in those romantic thoughts, restored his easygoing and calm smile, and nodded in agreement. "Since Admiral Zephyr is in the mood, I will respectfully comply." In a secluded private room of the instructor's cafeteria, the lighting was soft. The table was filled with sumptuous snacks and several bottles of strong rum. The two clinked glasses one after another, and the atmosphere was warm. However, after a few glasses of spicy liquor, the flush on Zephyr's face gradually deepened. But his originally excited expression became slightly serious and solemn. He put down his glass and revealed a core secret of the headquarters to the deputy he had high hopes for. "Victor, there are some things I need to tell you in advance. The old guys in the Marine High Command, like Sengoku and Marshal Kong, have placed unprecedented hopes on this batch of elite new recruits, as you know. So, this Friday, the headquarters will arrange a special assessment specifically to test the results of their training over the past half-month." Zephyr sighed heavily, a hint of fatigue showing in his rigid facial features. Although the specific assessment method and the selection of the chief examiner are still in the confidential stage and not very clear. But the pressure I've been under these past few days has been really great. If these kids don't make a name for themselves, I won't have anywhere to show my old face. Speaking of this, Zephyr poured himself another glass of wine and downed it in one gulp, his tone finally relaxing. "However, fortunately, I saw the stunning performance of Sakazuki, Gion, and the others today. Now, my tightly strung nerves can finally relax a little. Come, cheers." Victor calmly raised his glass to clink with his deep eyes flickering slightly. He secretly memorized the key intelligence of Friday assessment firmly in his heart. It seems that the training plan for this week needs to be adjusted in intensity. He must squeeze more potential out of this flock of sheep before Friday. Saying goodbye to the tipsy Admiral Zephyr, Victor walked alone, stepping on the cold moonlight, and returned to his exclusive instructor dormitory. He finished washing up simply, washing away the smell of gunpowder and alcohol from his body. After changing into a loose and comfortable bathrobe, he leaned lazily against the soft headboard. The lights in the room were dimmed by him, listening to the tick-tock, tick-tock sound of the clock on the wall. Victor's mind kept guessing what kind of reward Gion, who was usually bullied by him until she was teary-eyed, yet still incredibly tsundere, would give him tonight. What kind of ingenious reward she would give tonight? The night deepened, and everything was silent. Just as the hour hand was about to point to 10 o'clock. A few soft knocks finally came from outside the door. A smile curled on the corner of Victor's mouth, and he got up and walked over to open the door. However, when he saw clearly who was standing outside the door, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. He saw Gion outside the door, not wearing any provocative or sexy clothing as he had imagined. On the outside, she was actually wearing a large, thick long-sleeved marine uniform jacket. Not only that, she had even buttoned the very top button of the collar tightly, covering the skin below her neck completely. Combined with her slightly nervous expression at this moment, she looked solemn and reserved, like a subordinate called in by her superior in the middle of the night to report urgent military affairs. Gion, blushing, quickly slipped into the room like an agile and guilty cat. She leaned against the thick solid wood door, and with a click, she skillfully locked it. Before Victor could tease her about this strange fully armed attire, this flower of the Navy, who was usually at a disadvantage, suddenly had a rare flash of cunning and mischief in her beautiful, watery eyes. She took a deep breath and put her hands behind her back. The muscles of her long, straight legs, hidden under the oversized uniform, instantly tightened to the limit. The next second, in this narrow room with no space to maneuver, she unhesitatingly launched the saras she had just grasped. The Threshold of earlier that day. Bang! Accompanied by a dull but very clear, slight air explosion sound. The wooden floor under Guillaume's feet let out an unbearable creak. Her figure instantly turned into a blurred afterimage, moving straight forward for a full meter. Although because of the small space and lack of proficiency, her steps seemed very clumsy, and she stumbled a bit when she landed. But the 1 meter distance was calculated just right, making her entire body like a soft, warm cannonball fired, throwing herself directly into Victor's unprepared, sturdy embrace. Taking advantage of this strong momentum, Guillaume took the opportunity to raise her arms and tightly hug Victor's neck. The center of gravity for both of them was instantly lost, and she tackled this tall, mighty instructor directly onto the large, soft sofa behind him. Both of them sank into the soft sofa cushions. Guillaume boldly straddled his strong thighs, looking down at the man beneath her. Her watery, charming eyes were now full of a victor's pride and endless allure. "Officer, I learned so quickly today. Not only did I grasp the essentials, but now I can also apply what I've learned. Are you satisfied with this reward?" Looking at the stunning girl riding on top of him, full of spirit, Victor's deep eyes were full of amusement and doting affection. He raised his handsome, sword-like eyebrows, and his strong arms naturally wrapped around her slender waist. "The speed is indeed not bad. However, this doesn't look like an outfit to give an officer a reward, Guillaume." Facing Victor's teasing gaze, Guillaume did not shyly retort as usual. She gently bit her moist, beautiful red lips, and as her eyes wandered, she exuded a natural charm. She didn't retort, but slowly raised her white, jade-like hands and gently grabbed the lapels of that serious, reserved marine uniform jacket. Then, under Victor's gaze, which was gradually deepening, she exerted force and pulled the oversized jacket open to both sides. Boom! As the jacket was opened, Victor's brain felt as if it had been struck hard by a heavy hammer. Inside that serious military uniform, there was actually an extremely tight-fitting black silk nightgown. The delicate and smooth silk was like a second layer of skin, perfectly outlining her breathtaking, mature, and seductive graceful curves. The deep black contrasted with her snow-white, jade-like skin, glowing with a dazzling, fatal luster in the dim light. On the outside was the inviolable marine uniform, while inside was the silk nightgown full of mature charm. Feeling the scorching gaze of the man beneath her, which instantly became dark and dangerous, Guillaume slightly lifted her smooth chin. Braving that gaze that was about to melt her, she carried a hint of pride exclusive to a victor. Guillaume lowered her head and whispered softly in his ear, her breath like an orchid, "Officer, what about now, is this reward enough?" Facing this level of provocation, any verbal response would seem pale and powerless. Victor didn't say another word. He suddenly turned over, taking the initiative. The temperature on the sofa rose sharply, and the moonlight outside the window shyly hid behind the clouds. On this quiet night, all the romantic spring scenery and touching moans were tightly locked inside the room by this closed door. 10000 words omitted. Chapter 64, Early Morning Transponder Snail. A beautiful begonia waiting to be plucked at dawn, a faint glimmer of white began to appear on the horizon. The entirety of Marineford was still shrouded in the morning mist. Inside the quiet Vice Chief Instructor's dormitory, the transponder snail on the bedside table suddenly started ringing wildly without warning, brr brr, brr brr, breaking the charm and tranquility of the room. The light-sleeping Victor was awakened by the urgent ringing. He slowly opened his deep eyes and looked down at Guillaume, who was fast asleep, clinging tightly to his broad chest like an octopus. Looking at her beautiful, peaceful sleeping face, which bore a hint of exhaustion, a flicker of inseparable tenderness flashed in Victor's eyes. He moved her fair arm aside with extreme gentleness and placed her warm, soft body properly flat on the large bed. Afterward, he pulled back the covers and stepped barefoot onto the soft, thick wool carpet. Victor stepped over the torn clothing scattered across the floor from last night's intense battle. He walked to the table and picked up the receiver of the transponder snail. "Moshi Moshi, this is Victor." From the other end of the line, Zephyr's voice, laced with a hint of irritation and impatience, immediately came through. It turned out that the headquarters' high-ranking officials had suddenly issued an emergency order in the early hours of the morning. They demanded that Zephyr immediately go to the headquarters building's high-level conference room this morning for a meeting. They also wanted him to provide a detailed, specialized report on the recent training plans for the first elite training camp, as well as an assessment of the new recruits' potential. Zephyr, who had always been known for his swift and decisive actions, naturally hated this kind of bureaucratic paperwork. Over the phone, he unceremoniously complained bitterly about the red tape of the world government and the Marine High Command. Those old men who only know how to sit in their offices and drink tea all day long, they really don't know what it's like to be in the field. Training has only just gotten on the right track, and they insist on these superficial reports. Victor leaned against the edge of the table, listening quietly to his old superior's complaints while softly soothing the veteran's temper. "Admiral Zephyr, please don't be too angry. The reason the higher-ups are so anxious to hear the report is that Fleet Admiral Kong and the top brass have placed unprecedented high hopes on this batch of elites. Besides, all those high-spec food rations for the new recruit camp. Don't they all require resource allocation from headquarters? If you go and secure a bit more, we'll be able to train with even more freedom." Hearing Victor's well-reasoned persuasion, Zephyr laughed on the other end of the line, and the pent-up frustration in his heart immediately eased significantly. "You're still the one with the quick mind, what you say makes sense. Since that's the case, I'll go and demand some funding from those stingy guys today." In a much better mood, Zephyr then took the opportunity to propose a change to the training schedule. "However, with me gone, there will be no one to supervise this morning's training. And they worked very hard during yesterday's training, too. How about this, cancel today's originally scheduled practical class on the Marine 6 Powers CAM-E and swap it with your theory class tomorrow. You'll teach them for the entire day today." "No problem, leave it to me, Admiral Zephyr." Victor agreed decisively. After hanging up the phone, Victor turned around. On the large bed, Guillaume, who had been awakened by the sound of his voice, was rubbing her sleepy eyes. Her waterfall-like black hair was scattered across the white pillow. She blinked her moist, hazy, beautiful eyes blankly and asked in a soft, sweet voice, "Victor, who was that on the phone so early in the morning? Did something happen?" Victor walked back to the bedside. He casually explained that Zephyr had been called to headquarters for a meeting and that today would be changed to theory classes for the whole day. After hearing the news, Guillaume nodded as if she understood, and let out a small, unguarded yawn. Looking at his girlfriend in this dazed state, having shed all her defenses and coldness, appearing like a pure little white rabbit, Victor's firm lips immediately curled into an aggressive, wicked smile. He knelt on the mattress with one knee, rolled over onto the bed, and firmly pinned her delicate, soft body beneath him. The sudden weight caused Guillaume to let out a low cry. But facing Victor's scorching gaze, she only symbolically pushed against the man's chest twice. After a brief resistance, she blushed and obediently opened her legs to him. After these 2 days of being together, her body and instincts had clearly become accustomed to this superior-turned boyfriend. Looking at the naked, beautiful begonia beneath him, eyes shimmering and waiting to be plucked, Victor's Adam's apple bobbed slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened further. However, he didn't rush to act, but instead slowly leaned into her ear. "Are you sure you want to start now? I'd be more than happy to. However, a friendly reminder, there are only 20 minutes left until the new recruit camp's morning formation." 20 minutes? Hearing this incredibly urgent countdown, Guillaume, who had just been immersed in a pink haze of confusion, felt as if her brain had been doused with a bucket of ice water, and she was instantly wide awake. She let out a cry of surprise, summoned strength from somewhere, and shoved Victor off her. She jumped out of bed in a panic, barefoot, looking for the clothes she had taken off last night. However, to her extreme embarrassment, the battle last night had been far too intense and crazy. Her carefully prepared black silk nightgown had already been torn in several long places and couldn't be worn out. Victor, sitting on the bed, watched her anxious, cute appearance and stood up with a smile. He walked to the large wardrobe and opened the door. He took out a clean white shirt of his own and a pair of dark trousers, and thoughtfully handed them to her. Time was tight, there were only a few minutes left before the assembly whistle blew. Guillaume had no shyness or reserve left when it came to Victor. Right in front of Victor, she quickly pulled on the clothes, which were obviously much too large for her. She rolled up the overly long pant legs, haphazardly and hastily tied a knot in the hem of the oversized shirt. Before leaving, she gripped the doorknob, turned back with annoyance, and shot a charming, resentful glare at Victor, who was still sitting on the bed looking leisurely and content. Afterward, she grabbed her Marine uniform and pushed the door open like a thief. She sprinted all the way back to the nearby female dormitory to change and wash up. 20 minutes later, on the spacious No. 1 training ground of the new recruit camp, the morning sea breeze dispersed the last of the mist. 100 new recruits had already lined up in neat phalanxes. Just in the last second before the attendance officer was about to take roll call, Guillaume, panting, arrived just in time to join the ranks. At this moment, not only had she changed into a crisp, professional standard Marine training uniform, but she had also tied her long hair into a neat high ponytail. What was even more eye-catching was, in her hand, unusually, she was holding a thick, brick-like naval tactics theory textbook. Among this group of empty-handed, miserable-looking new recruits preparing to face the morning's devilish physical training, her get-up seemed particularly out of place. Before long, Victor, wearing his justice coat, walked to the front of the formation with steady strides. He scanned the crowd with lightning-like eyes, then loudly announced that Admiral Zephyr had urgent military business today. The news that all-day physical and practical training was cancelled, replaced by indoor theory classes. As soon as this news was announced, the new recruits below, who had long feared the physical training, immediately erupted into wild cheers of relief. Great! Finally, we don't have to run. Theory class is simply heaven. Oh. Victor! However, just as the new recruits were celebrating, Victor's face once again wore the devilish smile. He raised his right hand to signal for silence, then spoke in a cold tone, "Don't be happy. Too soon, a bunch of idiots. Now, I'll give you 10 minutes. Run back to your dorms immediately, grab your naval tactics textbooks, and get to lecture hall number 2. Within 10 minutes, anyone who doesn't make it to the classroom and sit down. We'll all have to put on 30-kilogram weighted vests and run 50 laps around the training ground." Once these words were spoken, the cheers that had just echoed through the sky instantly turned into miserable, agonizing wails. What? A 10-minute round trip? How is that even possible? Start the timer. Time was tight, and orders were absolute. The new recruits dared not complain any longer. They immediately broke their neat formation, each using every ounce of strength they had, scrambling and sprinting wildly toward the distant dormitory area. They were terrified that if they were even a second late, they would have to experience the deadly 50-lap weighted run. Watching this group of new recruits, who had been grinning just moments ago but were now in such a sorry state, Victor nodded with satisfaction. Afterward, he turned his head. He flashed a gentle, spring breeze-like smile at Guillaume and Reina, who was standing next to her and getting ready to run. He didn't say much else. Victor turned around and walked toward the lecture hall with elegant, calm, and unhurried strides. On the huge training ground, the morning breeze blew gently by. Reina had also been quite frightened by the 50 weighted laps remark. She was just about to reach out and grab Guillaume to sprint for their lives toward the dorms when she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her eyes widened, and she stared blankly at the naval tactics textbook that Guillaume had already prepared in her hand. The expression on Reina's face was as shocked as if she had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Guillaume. How did you know that Admiral Zephyr wouldn't be here today, and that it would be changed to Instructor Victor's theory class? You actually even brought this thick, brick-like book out in advance? Facing her best friend's incredibly shocked gaze, a sense of indescribable secret joy and unparalleled satisfaction welled up in Guillaume's heart. This wasn't some kind of clairvoyance. This was the absolute dominance of insider information. She slightly lifted her fair chin and elegantly held the thick textbook against her chest with both hands. Afterward, she tilted her head slightly, winked playfully at Reina with her bright eyes, and a proud arc appeared at the corner of her lips. She replied in a mysterious, light, and pleasant tone. I guessed it. After saying that, she ignored her bewildered roommate. Gion walked with an exceptionally light step, moving unhurriedly toward the classroom ahead in the morning sunlight. Chapter 65, Tactical Lesson on the Podium. The lazy monkey in secret flirting under the desk. The 10-minute countdown was like a Damocles sword hanging over everyone's heads. Accompanied by a flurry of chaos in the hallway, the deadline was about to expire. A chaotic and heavy sound of footsteps suddenly thundered outside the door of lecture hall number 2. Immediately after, Sakazuki, Borsellino, and other elite new recruits who were usually high and mighty, now panted heavily without any image, rushing into the classroom as disheveled as refugees. Each person clutched the brick-thick Naval Warfare Tactics theoretical textbook, their foreheads covered in fine beads of sweat, their chests heaving violently. In order not to be punished with a 50-lap run, they had truly put on a desperate display. As soon as they sat down and took deep breaths to calm their heartbeats, their gazes turned unanimously toward the beautiful figure sitting in the very center of the first row. There sat Admiral candidate Gion, sitting upright, calm and elegant in her seat. Among this group of sweating men, not only did she not break a single drop of sweat, but even the thick textbook in front of her had already been turned to the page to be taught today, with her fountain pen resting quietly beside the book's spine, facing the admiring gazes of the surrounding classmates, as if looking at a monster. Gion remained outwardly calm, perfectly maintaining the aloofness and dignity of the flower of the Navy. In reality, under the shadow of the textbook where no one could see, she was already overjoyed in her heart. She proudly lifted her smooth, swan-like chin, secretly rejoicing in her heart about the sudden den mushy call this morning and her boyfriend who possessed inside information. This secret sense of satisfaction, like performing a dimensionality reduction strike on her colleagues as if it were an open-book exam, was truly intoxicating. Ring, this sense of satisfaction, like an open-book exam dimensionality reduction strike, was truly intoxicating. As the crisp class bell rang right on time, Instructor Victor, wearing his coat of justice, walked onto the podium with steady steps and officially began today's theoretical lecture. Victor stood on the podium, picked up a piece of chalk, and turned to quickly sketch several clear sea areas on the blackboard. He began to explain the complex and ever-changing naval tactics and ship formations in simple terms. From the classic crane wing formation to the encirclement network against devil fruit users, his explanation was clear, logical, and fascinating. Just as all the new recruits in the class were attracted by this profound and practical tactical knowledge, bowing their heads and writing down class notes with focused expressions. In the back row of the large classroom, however, there appeared a highly discordant scene. Borsellino was wearing his signature tea-colored sunglasses, his whole body so lazy that it seemed as if he had no bones, leaning softly against the back of the chair. His head bobbed, and he even let out a slight snore, brazenly dozing off in Instructor Victor's class. Instructor Victor on the podium did not change his expression. He did not stop lecturing, he just casually snapped a piece of chalk in half and flicked his wrist with a seemingly careless motion. Whoosh! The half-piece of chalk instantly tore through the air like a bullet fired from a chamber, carrying a sharp whistling sound as it shot accurately toward Borsellino in the back row. However, an unexpected scene occurred. Borsellino didn't even lift his head, he just lazily reached out his right hand. With his two long, slender fingers, he gently pinched the air, catching the lightning-fast piece of chalk steadily and with absolute precision. Borsellino slowly raised his head and reached up to push the sunglasses that had slid down to the bridge of his nose. Right in front of the whole class, he opened his mouth and let out a long, unrefined yawn. Sorry, Instructor Victor, I wasn't asleep. I was just closing my eyes and bowing my head to study seriously. Looking at this yellow-skinned monkey who was as shameless as a dead pig unafraid of boiling water, Victor remained expressionless and asked calmly, since you are studying seriously, then briefly restate the few breakout tactics against pirate fleets that I just mentioned. Upon hearing this, Borsellino yawned again without any hesitation. He stood up and replied righteously and unhurriedly, Report, Instructor, my tactic is very simple. Find the pirates, bring the warship close, and then, wipe them all out. That is enough. This simple and crude hooligan answer instantly caused an uproar of laughter in the originally serious lecture hall. The new recruits turned red in the face, holding their stomachs and laughing until they bent over. Even the usually serious and rigid Sakazuki couldn't help but frown speechlessly. He felt deep disdain for his colleague's unprofessional attitude. Looking at this guy who was so lazy that it was simply hopeless, relying on his glint fruit. Victor sighed helplessly in his heart. He waved his hand, signaling the other to sit down. After the laughter in the classroom subsided a little, Victor turned his head, his deep gaze sweeping across all the students. What the monkey just said is indeed the simplest and most direct method to deal with pirates. But I advise all of you present here, without possessing absolute strength, do not easily attempt this brainless, suicidal tactic. As soon as Victor finished speaking, the classroom experienced a brief moment of dead silence. Then, an even more enthusiastic roar of laughter erupted than before. Ha ha ha. Monkey. The instructor's summary is too brilliant, a tactic exclusively for the monkey, ha ha. This merciless official roast and the confirmation of the nickname made the laughter rise and fall in the classroom. Borsellino, who had just sat down wearing his tea-colored sunglasses, felt the muscles at the corners of his mouth twitch violently as he heard the monkey appellation constantly coming to his ears. But he had no way to refute the instructor's words, which seemed like praise but were actually insulting. He could only pout depressedly, turning his head toward the window as if feigning interest in the scenery. Victor reached out and slapped the podium twice heavily. The dull sound instantly suppressed everyone's laughter, restoring the derailed class discipline. Subsequently, he picked up the thick lecture notes and strode down the high podium with his long legs. While continuing to eloquently explain the subsequent formation evolution and practical combat applications, he patrolled back and forth in the spacious aisles between the desks. He scrutinized the listening state of every new recruit with an oppressive posture. When Victor's footsteps paced to the side of Dion's seat in the first row, he seemed to be engrossed in looking at the notes and deliberately stopped his pace. His tall and upright figure stood in the aisle, perfectly blocking the prying eyes of the new recruits in the back row, forming a visual blind spot. One of Victor's hands rested casually on the edge of Dion's desk, his body leaning slightly forward. On the surface, this strict vice chief instructor seemed to be concentrating on checking whether the Admiral candidate's class notes were up to standard. However, underneath the solid wood desk where no one could see, his free long, slender hand reached over silently. Like a swimming snake, it accurately covered the back of Dion's fair hand, which was resting casually on her long legs. The man's palm was scorching hot, and he squeezed her hand gently. This sudden sensation made Dion's whole body stiffen as if she had been electrocuted. Her beautiful, flawless cheeks were instantly dyed with a moving and scorching crimson, and even her crystal-clear earlobes were so red that they seemed ready to drip blood. In this solemn marine classroom, being teased like this by her superior in front of 100 classmates, a strong sense of immorality made her heart almost explode in her chest. She didn't dare to look up at Victor standing beside her, for fear that the panic and romantic feelings in her eyes would be captured by others. She could only force herself to remain calm, staring intently at the textbook in front of her, trying to pretend she was listening attentively. However, her slender little hand holding the fountain pen trembled slightly on the paper, drawing a messy ink mark. Feeling the girl's stiff body and hot skin, Victor stopped while ahead. He released the soft, tender little hand as if nothing had happened. He straightened his body, took the lecture notes, and continued to walk forward with steady steps. His mouth still methodically explained the dry tactical theory, as if the black-bellied hooligan from just a moment ago was not him at all. Unknowingly, the bell for the end of class rang crisply. This theory class, full of solid content, ended successfully in an atmosphere where everyone was still wanting more. After 2 days of getting along, the new recruits not only felt deep fear and awe for Victor's unfathomable absolute strength. Now they were even more impressed by his profound tactical knowledge and the practical combat cases he could bring up at will. This vice chief instructor was simply a monster with no shortcomings. He lived up to the name of an impeccable genius. Victor closed the lecture notes, methodically packed up the chalk and lesson plans on the podium, and prepared to leave the classroom. When he walked to the classroom door, he happened to meet the gaze cast by Dion from the front row. In those beautiful eyes like autumn water, there was a bit of coquettishness after being teased, as well as an irrepressible thick shyness and affection. The moment they brushed past each other, they exchanged a secret look that only they could understand, with a tacit understanding. However, just when this pink atmosphere was incredibly harmonious and the air was filled with a faint ambiguity. On the quiet corridor outside the window, a sound of unhurried military boot footsteps suddenly came. Immediately following, a figure with silver hair, wearing a large justice cloak, blocked the sunlight in the hallway and appeared without warning outside the door of Lecture Hall Number 2. Chapter 66, Vice Admiral Tsuru's Audit. The restless little foot under the dining table. The person arriving wore a wide marine coat of justice, her silver hair combed meticulously. Although time had left faint traces at the corners of her eyes, those eyes full of wisdom remained as sharp as ever. This was none other than the Chief of Staff of Marineford, the renowned Vice Admiral Tsuru. She had just finished handling the complex military affairs at the headquarters building today and had a little free time. So she stopped by the new recruit camp to conduct a casual inspection. And by the way, check on Gion, whom she had always treated like a younger sister. Standing outside the glass window of the classroom's back door, Vice Admiral Tsuru's gaze was like a torch. Her gaze, having seen countless people, lingered on Gion in the front row for only a moment before she keenly noticed something unusual. She could tell at a glance that Gion's spirit and energy were completely different from the past, truly looking like a new person. It was a kind of composure and confidence after shedding the immaturity of a young girl, like a sword carefully polished by a peerless master craftsman. Although the sharpness was restrained, it exuded a mature and stunning charm. Vice Admiral Tsuru nodded silently in her heart, a trace of genuine appreciation flashing in her eyes. It seemed that handing this girl over to Instructor Victor for training was indeed a wise move. In just over a week, Gion had undergone such a thorough transformation. Instructor Victor really knew how to teach. Thinking of this, her favor for this promising Vice Chief Instructor increased greatly. After the new recruits dispersed completely, Vice Admiral Tsuru walked into the classroom with a smile, actively inviting Instructor Victor and Gion to have lunch together at the instructor's exclusive cafeteria. In a quiet private room of the instructor's cafeteria, a faint tea fragrance lingered in the air. The three of them sat around a round table. Vice Admiral Tsuru picked up the white porcelain teacup in front of her and gently blew on the floating tea leaves. Her seemingly casual gaze scanned back and forth, without leaving a trace, over Gion's increasingly charming and beautiful face, as well as her figure, which appeared somewhat unnatural due to occasional shifts in sitting posture. As someone who had been through it all, how could Vice Admiral Tsuru not see the guilty conscience in the girl's eyes? She was a little puzzled. Gion, Vice Admiral Tsuru put down her teacup, a meaningful and gentle smile on the corners of her mouth, and asked softly. The training plan formulated by that old guy Admiral Zephyr has always been strict. Logically speaking, all of you new recruits should be exhausted by now. But I see that in the last 2 days, not only are you not haggard, but your complexion is even more rosy and radiant than before. Why, did you encounter something particularly happy in the training camp? Hearing this seemingly casual question, Gion's hand holding the chopstick stiffened abruptly, and her heartbeat skipped a beat. Her guilty brain began to run crazily at this moment. Images flashed uncontrollably in her mind, the madness on the sofa last night, the oversized white shirt this morning, and the lingering soreness in her thighs. To cover up her inner panic, Gion forced down the heat rising on her cheeks. She barely squeezed out a seemingly natural and well-behaved smile and stammered out an excuse. No, Sister Tsuru, you're mistaken. Maybe it's because I've had a breakthrough in physical techniques recently. I just mastered the technique for sorrow in the 6 powers, so I'm in a better mood. Yes, it's because of the improvement in strength that I'm feeling more energetic. Oh? You've already reached the threshold of sorrow? Vice Admiral Tsuru heard this and was indeed distracted, her eyes widening in surprise. You know, although Gion had a gifted talent for swordsmanship, she had always been slightly weak in pure physical explosive power. To be able to make up for this shortcoming in such a short time now was truly surprising. Vice Admiral Tsuru was full of gratification and, in front of Instructor Victor, did not hesitate to praise Gion repeatedly. This finally allowed Gion to breathe a long sigh of relief, temporarily escaping the crisis. Subsequently, Vice Admiral Tsuru ate her lunch gracefully while casually turning the topic to Instructor Victor opposite her. She inquired about various details regarding the overall training progress of the first elite new recruit camp. just as Instructor Victor was answering with focused expression. Guillaume, who was sitting opposite him eating quietly, looked at the man's serious and stern face. A daring and mischievous idea suddenly arose in her heart. She lowered her eyelids slightly, a sly, wicked smile quietly curling at the corners of her mouth. Under the cover of the large tablecloth, Guillaume quietly kicked off the slightly heavy uniform leather shoes she was wearing. She stretched out her tender little foot, clad in thin black silk stockings, and silently probed forward under the table. After accurately capturing the target, that soft, warm little foot followed the straight calf of Instructor Victor's trousers, with a full sense of provocation, slowly teasing its way up. Feeling the sudden, warm, soft, and suggestively fatal touch on his leg, Instructor Victor's voice, which was speaking, paused for half a second, barely perceptibly. Deep within his profound eyes, a cluster of dangerous fire ignited instantly. But he knew this was definitely not the time to act out. Instructor Victor took a deep breath, pressed his thin lips together, and forcibly suppressed the heat and restlessness stirred up in his heart. Relying on his amazing self-control, his expression remained normal, and his voice did not tremble in the slightest. He continued to answer Vice Admiral Tsuru's professional questions about tactical exercises in an orderly manner, as if that wanton little foot under the table did not exist at all. And the culprit sitting opposite, Guillaume, was currently holding her teacup with both hands, pretending to listen carefully. Through the action of drinking tea, she perfectly concealed the increasingly brilliant, sly smile at the corners of her mouth. Watching Instructor Victor's appearance of being clearly stirred up, yet forced to pretend to be calm in front of his superior, Guillaume was overjoyed. Guillaume was blooming with joy in her heart. She thoroughly enjoyed the incomparable thrill of committing a crime secretly with her boyfriend under the eyes of a strict elder. So, the movement of the little foot became even more unbridled. After a lunch full of undercurrents, the new recruit camp welcomed the afternoon theory class. Vice Admiral Tsuru did not return to the headquarters building immediately, but walked into the number 2 lecture hall with great interest. She sat quietly in the last row of the classroom, auditing the entire tactical course taught by Instructor Victor. Instructor Victor on the podium had long since returned to his excellent, calm state. Facing the vast sea chart on the blackboard, he cited classics and authorities. He dissected those complex and obscure naval battle formations, fleet coordination, and breakout strategies in the face of extreme weather, and so on. It could be said that he analyzed them thoroughly and explained them in simple terms. Even Vice Admiral Tsuru, the chief of staff who held a high position and was well informed, could not help but nod frequently while listening from the back row. The appreciation in her eyes grew stronger and stronger. Such excellent tactical literacy and overall perspective were simply rare among the younger generation of Marine officers. As the melodious bell rang for the end of class, this wonderful tactical class came to an end, and the new recruits packed up their textbooks and dispersed with cheers. Vice Admiral Tsuru walked from the back row to the front of the podium with a smile, not hesitating to praise Instructor Victor's superb theoretical level and teaching skills in person, saying that even she felt she had benefited a lot from this class. Subsequently, she turned her head and earnestly exhorted Guillaume, who was standing on the side. She must learn humbly from Instructor Victor and must not be arrogant or complacent. Before leaving, Vice Admiral Tsuru stopped. Her eyes, full of great wisdom, seemed to see through everything. Her gaze swept back and forth meaningfully between Instructor Victor and Guillaume's faces. Subsequently, she reached out, gently patted Guillaume's thin shoulders, and urged with a smile, "The assessment this Friday is of great importance. Prepare well, don't embarrass us female Marines, do you understand?" "Yes, Sister Tsuru, I will definitely go all out." Guillaume immediately straightened her back and promised loudly. Accompanied by the crisp footsteps fading away, after confirming that Vice Admiral Tsuru had completely walked away. In the originally empty and spacious classroom, only the two of them were left instantly. Without the suppression of an elder. The dangerous light in Instructor Victor's eyes, which had been painfully suppressed for the whole afternoon, erupted completely at this moment, no longer able to be contained. He strode forward, his strong and powerful long arm wrapping around Guillaume's slender waist that could be held in one hand. He directly pressed this flower of the Navy, who had been wanton and mischievous under the dining table just a moment ago, heavily against the edge of the lecture desk. "You had fun playing under the table at noon, didn't you?" "Your Excellency, Adjutant." Instructor Victor pressed his tall body up, lowered his head, and whispered into her somewhat flustered ear. Subsequently, he did not give Guillaume any chance to argue or beg for mercy. Instructor Victor fiercely lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was domineering and full of aggression, sweeping in like a storm, greedily demanding every inch of sweetness and fragrance between her lips and teeth. The strong masculine scent instantly surrounded her completely, causing Guillaume, who was pressed on the lecture desk, to go limp all over. Her throat also uncontrollably emitted bursts of soft, coquettish whimpers that made one's bones melt. Just when the two were kissing intensely and inseparable. Even when Instructor Victor's large hand had already begun to restlessly reach toward that slender waist. Suddenly, on the corridor outside the classroom, a burst of extremely urgent and heavy footsteps came. The footsteps headed straight for the lecture hall. "Someone's coming." Both were startled at the same time, separating instantly as if struck by electricity. Guillaume was blushing with embarrassment, turning around in a flurry. She quickly tidied up her uniform collar, which had been rubbed into a slight mess, gasping for breath to calm her wildly beating heart. With a bang, the classroom door was pushed open violently. An auxiliary instructor, covered in sweat, rushed into the classroom panting. He held his knees with both hands, panting heavily. He had no mind to carefully observe the unusually flushed faces of the two people by the podium, nor the lingering aura of romance in the air. This instructor's expression was extremely anxious, and he reported loudly in a hurry, Instructor Victor. "Finally found you. Admiral Zephyr just came back from a meeting at the headquarters building. He has urgently summoned all the instructors in the conference room of the administration building, demanding everyone to assemble for a meeting immediately. Please go and attend immediately." Hearing it was an emergency summons from Admiral Zephyr, Instructor Victor instantly restrained all evil thoughts, and the expression on his face returned to seriousness. He nodded steadily and agreed immediately. "Understood, I'll go right away." Having received the reply, the auxiliary instructor turned around quickly and ran toward the other training areas like a gust of wind. Apparently, he still had to go and notify the remaining instructors who had not arrived. Chapter 67, Death Row Prisoners of Impel Down. The Admiral's confidence and a fragrant embrace. Pushing open the heavy mahogany doors of the conference room on the top floor of the administrative building. Around the large round table, all the assistant instructors of the new recruit camp were already sitting upright and composed. Even Instructor Thorne, who usually loved to joke around in private, was tightening his face, not daring to even breathe loudly. Victor's eyes flickered, and he strode to his designated seat as vice chief instructor and sat down. Admiral Zephyr, sitting at the head of the table, had a cold, iron-like expression, resembling a statue that commanded respect without needing to be angry. His weathered hands were crossed on the table, and beside them lay a top-secret document stamped with the highest confidential seal of Marineford. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Zephyr took a deep breath. He announced the final results of the meeting held at the headquarters building this morning. "Everyone, Fleet Admiral Kong and Admiral Sengoku have immeasurable expectations for this first elite camp that we have spent vast resources of Marineford to create. The higher-ups unanimously believe that those routine physical training drills and rigid 6 powers tests are simply unable to gauge the true combat caliber of this group of geniuses." Zephyr tapped his fingers lightly on the table twice. "Therefore, this Friday's performance evaluation will not be a typical graded assessment. Instead, it will take place in the special arena at Marineford, where they will engage in real combat against actual pirates." Hearing this, the instructors below began to look at each other. But under the pressure of their superior, no one dared to speak up and interrupt. Immediately after, Zephyr dropped a shocking piece of news that was enough to cause a massive earthquake, in order to let this group of hothouse flowers witness the cruelty of the sea. The higher-ups specifically issued an order to secretly transfer a group of truly bloodthirsty pirates from the deep-sea prison, Impel Down, to serve as whetstones for these new recruits. Among them, there are several vicious pirates with bounties reaching the tens of millions. More importantly, Friday's assessment will not only be attended by a large number of high-ranking officers from Marineford, but high-ranking officials from the world government will also come in person to watch and judge. As soon as these words were spoken, the previously silent conference room was like a bombshell had been dropped, causing an immediate uproar. Several assistant instructors could no longer suppress their shock and worry, and one after another, they stood up from their chairs, expressing their opposition with anxious faces. Admiral Zephyr. How can this be? This is no joke. Although they are all geniuses from various branches, they have only been training for less than 2 weeks in total. Their combat skills have not yet fully formed. To have them directly face those vicious prisoners brought out from Impel Down now. If the slightest mistake happens, people will really die. Facing the intense concern of the crowd, Zephyr did not scold them, nor did he offer much explanation. He just sat quietly at the head of the table, letting the instructors vent their emotions. When the voices of the crowd gradually died down, this iron-blooded veteran spoke in a deep voice, delivering the final word, protest ineffective. This assessment plan has already been finalized by the higher-ups. Right at this moment while we are meeting, those pirates serving as whetstones have already been heavily guarded and transported to the secret underground prison in Marineford. The matter is settled and cannot be changed. Zephyr's dignified gaze swept over the face of every instructor. As instructors, what you need to do now is not to complain and worry here, but to have full confidence in your students. The air in the conference room seemed to have solidified, and the instructors all showed troubled expressions. They certainly believed in the potential of the students, but those were, after all, bloodthirsty death row prisoners. The gap in actual combat experience cannot be easily bridged by talent. Looking at the worried subordinates below, Zephyr suddenly changed the subject. This iron-fisted admiral, who had dedicated his life to the Marine, slowly revealed a look of arrogant disdain on his face, which was as cold and hard as granite. He puffed out his broad chest, and his whole body radiated a majestic aura that put people at ease. Besides, what are you guys worrying about for nothing? As long as I am sitting in that arena, I will never let these damn scumbag pirates hurt my students in the slightest. This resounding and domineering declaration was like a stabilizer, instantly piercing into everyone's hearts. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere in the conference room suddenly relaxed, as if melting ice and snow. The instructors reacted one after another, looked at each other, and exhaled a long breath of relief in unison. That's right. They were just too worried and lost their judgment. Not to mention the high-ranking Marine officers coming to watch the ceremony in advance. With Admiral Zephyr, the former highest combat power of the Marine, personally presiding. Plus Colonel Victor, the unfathomably strong Vice Chief Instructor, and so many battle-hardened elite assistant instructors. How could a mere few dozen pirates kill people recklessly right under their noses? Having figured this out, the gloomy clouds on everyone's faces finally dissipated, and they regained their confidence as Marine instructors. Zephyr slapped the table and announced that the meeting was officially over. The instructors stood up and saluted one after another, then discussed the security details of Friday's assessment in low voices in groups of 3 or 2, and left the conference room one after another. Just as Victor also stood up and prepared to leave. Victor, wait a moment. Zephyr's deep voice came from behind, calling him alone. Victor stopped, turned around, and walked back to the round table. Zephyr did not beat around the bush. His torch-like eyes stared intently at Victor, and he solemnly assigned him a task for Friday's assessment. For Friday's combat assessment, I have decided that you will serve as the referee on the field. Zephyr's tone was serious, but his eyes showed unreserved trust. Those scums released from Impel Down will definitely use any means necessary to save their lives. I authorize you, at the necessary moments of the assessment. That is, when you judge that a new recruit is facing an unavoidable life-threatening danger, you can intervene and terminate the combat at any time. Your judgment is the final verdict. Hearing this arrangement, a flash of light flickered in Victor's eyes. He straightened his back and nodded without hesitation, agreeing to it. In fact, when he learned that he would be fighting against death row prisoners, Victor had some inner turmoil. After all, he also cared about the lives of those unruly new recruits. But he was even more worried about his beautiful girlfriend, who was still a bit weak in hand-to-hand combat. But now, Zephyr had personally handed him the power of a referee and the authority to intervene in the battle at any time. With this, Victor naturally no longer needed to have any concerns or worries. As long as he was on the field, let alone pirates with bounties in the tens of millions, even a great pirate with a bounty of over 100 million wouldn't be able to hurt Guillaume. With all important matters concluded, Victor saluted Zephyr and then turned and left the administrative building. It was completely dark outside, the deep blue night sky was dotted with stars, and a cool sea breeze blew through the streets. Victor followed the quiet night, walking steadily back to his exclusive instructor dormitory area. Along the way, his mind was still calculating various contingencies and response plans for the arena on Friday. Walking to his dormitory door, Victor took out his key and pushed the door open. Click! As soon as the door was pushed open, before he could reach out to touch the wall light switch and see the lighting arrangement in the room. In the darkness, a light, elegant, and incomparably familiar pleasant fragrance of begonia flowers, like a gentle evening breeze, rushed towards him without warning. Victor was all too familiar with this intoxicating fragrance. Accompanying this intoxicating fragrance, a warm, soft, graceful, and amazingly supple body attacked directly from the shadows behind the door. Guillaume, like a swallow returning to its nest, threw herself precisely into his broad and sturdy embrace. Facing this sudden attack, Victor's body instinct made him subconsciously reach out his arms. He steadily supported her slender waist, which could barely be grasped by one hand, and locked her body firmly in front of his chest. The beauty in his arms was naturally Guillaume, who had sneaked in using his spare key. In the darkness, Victor's palm could clearly feel the smooth texture of the clothes she was wearing. "Surprise, my officer, this is a surprise for you." She pressed her burning cheek against the crook of Victor's neck, her hands clutching his neck tightly, her breathing rapid and revealing an unconcealable longing. This passionate, active, and well-behaved appearance was like the warmest spring breeze, instantly dispelling all the murderous and cold aura that Victor had been stained with. "Oh? A surprise? Then I have to properly inspect the goods." The originally quiet and cool night, because of this hug full of love and longing, immediately began to heat up rapidly, turning into a room full of indescribable beauty. Chapter 68, Swaying Moonlight and Begonias. Pillow talk and boiling fighting spirit. The darkness in Victor's eyes was ignited in an instant. He didn't speak, but instead backhanded the door shut with a loud bang and locked it tight. Immediately after, his strong, powerful arm swept around her slender waist, which could barely be held in one hand. With a turn, he domineeringly and irresistibly pressed her entire body against the hard, cold door panel. However, Victor did not immediately get to the point like a starving wolf pouncing on its prey. He lowered his head, gently bringing his high-bridged nose to the most sensitive and delicate skin behind her ear. As if savoring a peerless vintage wine, he slowly rubbed against it, barely touching it. He deeply inhaled the enchanting fragrance emanating from her neck. The man's warm breath, carrying male pheromones, rhythmically sprayed across her ear and collarbone. This bone-deep, tingling provocation caused this usually aloof admiral candidate to tremble uncontrollably all over. Her body, which had been slightly tense from the surprise attack, instantly softened into a pool of spring water at this moment, leaving her only able to lean weakly between the door panel and his embrace. "Hurry! Victor!" An unbearable, low urge spilled from Guillaume's throat, her voice so soft and sweet it seemed to spin into silk. Hearing this invitation, which sounded like a military order, Victor's Adam's apple bobbed slightly. His long, well-defined fingers slid slowly down the slender, graceful line of her back, his movements filled with absolute patience. Subsequently, his fingers moved to the front, skillfully undoing the buttons on her serious marine uniform with one hand. His rough fingertips grazed her warm skin intentionally or unintentionally, bringing waves of suffocating electric sensations. Feeling the chill on her chest followed by the scorching touch, Guillaume let out an unbearable whimper. She could no longer endure this torturous rhythm. She took the initiative to stand on her tiptoes, tilted up her stunningly beautiful face, and offered her luscious red lips without reservation. In the narrow, dim entryway, the two clashed fiercely, exchanging a long, lingering, and passionate kiss. Between their lips and teeth, one could only hear their gradually heavy breathing. As the kiss deepened, the string of reason snapped completely. Victor's arms exerted sudden force, lifting the beauty in his embrace horizontally. He strode forward with his long legs, walking toward the spacious bedroom. Along the way, it was like a romantic escape where armor was discarded. Heavy, cold black military boots, a stiff and serious Marine officer's coat, and even that most cumbersome white undershirt. These garments, which represented military discipline and restraint, were like signposts pointing the way. One by one, they were mercilessly cast aside, scattered messily on the clean floor leading to the bed. Guillaume buried her burning, fiery cheek deep into Victor's solid chest. Listening to the steady, powerful heartbeat coming from the man's chest, pounding like a war drum, she completely shed the layer of aloofness and strength she used to disguise herself during the day. In this private space that belonged only to the two of them, she willingly transformed into a pool of rippling spring water that belonged only to him. The curtains in the bedroom were only half drawn, and outside the half-covered gap was the deep night sky. The cold, bright white moonlight poured down like mercury, spilling without reservation onto the large, soft double bed, coating the room's spring scenery in a hazy layer of silver gauze. On the wall, the two tightly intertwined figures were elongated by the slanted moonlight. The silhouettes on the wall constantly changed shape amidst the interweaving of light and shadow. At times, like delicate vines clinging to a towering tree in a storm, entangled endlessly. At times, like a lone boat riding the waves in a raging sea, rising and falling continuously. The entire originally monotonous wall was illuminated, vivid and full of primal tension. In the silent night, the temperature in the room continued to rise unnaturally, and the air was filled with an thick, inseparable scent of pheromones. In the glass cup placed on the solid wood nightstand, there was half a cup of clear warm water. At this moment, with the rhythmic pulses coming from the large bed, that half cup of clear water could not remain calm. Ripples, fine, rapid, and continuous, swirled on the water's surface. Victor's low, hoarse, and heavy gasps perfectly intertwined with the broken, uncontrollable, delicate moans from the young woman. These two voices, in the quiet deep night of Marineford, played a most primal midnight hymn. The wind and rain swayed, and the waves rolled, until a thick dark cloud drifted in from outside the window, quietly covering the shy bright moonlight in the sky, plunging the entire room into total darkness. This satisfying, torrential storm that seemed to exhaust all their strength. Only then, amidst the young woman's melodious and high-pitched cry, did the curtain slowly fall. The storm finally ceased, and only the sound of their gradually calming breathing remained in the bedroom. Guillaume lay drenched in sweat on Victor's broad chest, which was still radiating a scorching temperature. Her fair, jade-like fingertips, flushed with an alluring pink, were unconsciously drawing small circles one after another on his steel-hard abdominal muscles. She closed her eyes, a satisfied smile hanging on the corner of her lips, greedily enjoying this rare postcoital peace and warmth. Victor lay flat on the bed, one hand gently holding her smooth and delicate shoulders. The other hand lovingly and gently played with her long black hair, which was thoroughly soaked with sweat and stuck to her cheek. According to his usual habit in Madame Takayanagi's room or when resting alone. At such satisfying moments, Victor would habitually take out a high-quality cigar, light it, and enjoy the pleasure of puffing on it. But tonight, his fingers just moved slightly, and he immediately dismissed the thought. Considering that this clean-loving little woman in his arms had always disliked the pungent smell of burning tobacco, he very considerately gave up this only hobby. The room was quiet for a moment. Victor stroked her beautiful hair, his deep eyes flickering in the darkness. Subsequently, he broke the silence. This afternoon, Admiral Zephyr went to the headquarters building for an emergency meeting. He brought back a bombshell of news about you all from the fleet admiral. Victor's voice still carried a hint of postcoital hoarseness, but he did not intend to hide anything from his woman. His tone was steady as he laid out the truth he had learned in the conference room this afternoon regarding the Friday arena assessment. This Friday's assessment will no longer be a routine physical fitness or 6 powers grading. To test your quality, the headquarters high-ups have arranged a real combat battle. Your opponents will be a group of death row inmates secretly escorted from the Great Prison, impelled down. These people are not street thugs, they are all desperate criminals with blood on their hands who kill without blinking. Among them, there are even vicious pirates with bounties exceeding 10 million berries. As Victor spoke, he felt the temperature of the delicate body in his arms. He had originally thought that when hearing about having to engage in a life-and-death struggle with those truly murderous desperate criminals this Friday. No matter how arrogant and strong-willed Guillaume was, as a young female Marine who had not yet truly experienced cruel naval warfare, the little woman in his arms would more or less show a trace of instinctive worry, or weakness in seeking his protection. However, the reality was completely unexpected to him. Hearing this shocking assessment content, Guillaume's fair fingertips, which were originally drawing circles on his abdominal muscles, suddenly paused. Immediately after, she quickly raised her head. In those beautiful eyes, which were originally still carrying a bit of post-coital watery haze and lazy drowsiness. In this instant, an incredibly bright, sharp, and astonishing light erupted unexpectedly. There was not a shred of fear, nor any retreat. Guillaume was so excited that she sat straight up from his embrace. Because the movement was too large, the thin silk quilt that was originally covering her body instantly slid down her smooth skin to her waist, revealing a large area of fair, dazzling, and charming scenery on her upper body, as well as those mottled and eye-catching red marks. But at this moment, this usually reserved Admiral candidate did not care at all about her exposure. She clenched her delicate pink fists tightly, and because of her excitement, her full chest heaved violently. In her originally soft and delicate tone, there was now uncontrollable, fierce fighting spirit and excitement. Great! This is really great! Guillaume's eyes were terrifyingly bright, like a female leopard that had finally smelled blood. You don't even know, I've been worried lately that every day in the training ground, I can only face those rigid wooden stakes and have to hold back everywhere. I can't let loose at all, it's suffocating me. Pirates? And they are death row inmates from Impel Down? That's even better. It's just right to use this group of real scum to hone my blade and show the headquarters my true swordsmanship. By the way, I can also test the Marine 6 power shave I just learned today in actual combat. Let's see if it's really useful in a life-and-death struggle. Looking at the stunning girl in front of him, radiating high fighting spirit and so excited that even the corners of her eyes carried sharpness, Victor was slightly stunned at first. Subsequently, an undisguised, intense admiration and affection instantly welled up in his deep eyes. This is the woman Victor has taken a fancy to. How is this a delicate flower that can only be raised in a greenhouse for people to admire? This is clearly a blood-stained begonia blooming against the storm, not only incomparably beautiful but also carrying deadly sharpness and an unyielding will. What flows in her bones is the desire for battle and the pride that belongs to a top-tier powerhouse. A low, pleasant laugh erupted from Victor's chest. He stretched out his strong arms and smilingly pulled this female war god, who was trembling slightly from excitement, back into his broad, warm embrace without question. He carefully pulled the slipped silk quilt and covered her alluring scenery tightly again. Subsequently, he lowered his head. He planted a kiss filled with doting and encouragement on her smooth forehead with exceptionally gentle movements. Good. Since you are so confident. Then this Friday in the arena, I will sit in the referee's seat and enjoy watching Our Lady Rabbit slaughtering the competition and showing off her heroic posture on the ring. Victor's large hand gently patted her back, and he said softly as if coaxing a child, but before that, in order to have a perfect performance, you must immediately close your eyes now. Sleep, rest up well, and meet the upcoming challenges. Hearing these words from Victor, full of support and trust, the fighting spirit in Guillaume's heart gradually subsided, turning into a thick sweetness and peace of mind. She nodded obediently and heavily, pressed her cheek close to his chest again, and found the most comfortable position in Victor's broad embrace, which made one feel incredibly at ease. This future Admiral candidate, with infinite anticipation for Friday's assessment and a faint smile on the corner of her lips, soon fell into a deep sleep, entering a sweet dreamland. Chapter 69, The Covetous Morning. Zephyr's fanatical pre-war mobilization. The morning sunlight, like shattered gold, filtered through the gaps in the half-closed curtains, gently falling into this spacious bedroom filled with the lingering warmth of ambiguity. In the air, there still remained the unique, charming atmosphere following last night's gale and torrential rain. After that soul-deep exchange last night, Guillaume was currently like a lazy and insecure little rabbit. Her defenseless, delicate body was curled tightly within Victor's broad embrace, which radiated an astonishing heat. Facing Victor's slightly mischievous and tender teasing upon waking up in the morning, this flower of the Navy, who was usually high and mighty on the training grounds, unexpectedly didn't show the slightest hint of her tsundere attitude today. Instead, she rubbed against the man's warm chest with utmost submissiveness and cooperation. Those arms, as white as jade, were wrapped even more tightly around Victor's lean and strong waist. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and her exquisite face was filled with a thick sense of covetousness, a desire to not get out of bed and to indulge in this moment forever. While the two were whispering endearments and enjoying this rare moment of tranquility, Victor lowered his head, his deep eyes full of smiles. He reached out his well-defined fingers and gently pinched Guillaume's cheek, which was tinged with a faint pink from just waking up. Yesterday at noon in the cafeteria, you, little rabbit, were quite bold, actually daring to be so presumptuous under the table. However, with Vice Admiral Tsuru's keen and experienced eyes, she might have already seen through the intimate relationship between us. Hearing Victor's words, which were meant to deliberately scare her, Guillaume, who had been slumped in his arms like a pool of spring water, instantly snapped awake. She shook her head like a rattle, her supple long black hair spreading out across the pillow. She indignantly tilted up her smooth, swan-like chin. Her watery, charming eyes were full of determined disbelief as she retorted with certainty, "How is that possible? Don't try to scare me. We acted so naturally in the cafeteria yesterday, the whole time was a serious, businesslike attitude, without even a single transgressive look. Even if Sister Tsuru is smart, she could never guess our movements under the table." Seeing her blushing face and her particularly charming and cute appearance, like someone plugging their ears while stealing a bell, a low, pleasant laugh escaped from Victor's chest. He doted on her by stroking her long hair, not heartlessly piercing through the self-deceiving veil. However, since his little rabbit wanted to believe she was flawless, he would let her be happy. After a moment of tenderness, Victor lifted the covers and got up. He put on a loose set of loungewear, walked into the kitchen, and before long, brought out a fragrant and nutritious breakfast made with love. Draped in Victor's shirt, Guillaume contentedly finished off the fried eggs and milk on her plate, replenishing the massive amount of energy consumed last night. After eating and drinking her fill, she reluctantly changed back into that crisp, standard Marine training uniform. Under Victor's smiling gaze, she looked around stealthily like a thief, just as she always did. Then she slipped out of the instructor's dormitory door and jogged through the morning dew, rushing back to her own female dormitory to prepare for the morning assembly. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, on Marineford's number 1 new recruit training ground, the sea breeze blew. 100 members of the first-term elite new recruits were all fully armed and had finished gathering. The Fleet Admiral Instructor, Admiral Zephyr, was clad in a broad justice coat, standing steadily on the high platform like an iron tower. His face, weathered by the years, was solemn and naturally authoritative. Without any redundant nonsense, Zephyr scanned the field with eyes as sharp as torches. He directly announced the final decision of yesterday afternoon's headquarters meeting to everyone. The news of the ultimate practical combat assessment against the death row inmates of Impel Down. Furthermore, the time for this assessment, which concerned everyone's future in life or death, was set for tomorrow, Friday at noon. This sudden, terrifying news was like a heavy bomb of incredible yield, exploding without warning on the quiet playground, instantly causing a massive uproar. The expressions on the faces of the new recruits in the formation below became varied and spectacular at this moment. Monsters like Sakazuki had their eyes light up instantly, their entire bodies radiating uncontrollable excitement and battle intent. While some new recruits whose strength was in the middle or lower tiers and were usually only accustomed to sparring, their faces turned pale on the spot, their legs went weak, and their eyes were full of panicked bewilderment. In the crowd, several new recruits with weaker foundations finally couldn't help but step out of the queue, braving Zephyr's terrifying pressure, and shouted, "Admiral Zephyr! The assessment is directly tomorrow at noon? Isn't this time too short and too rushed? We are about to face those desperate criminals from the great prison who kill without blinking. We need at least more time to prepare." Facing the commotion and panic gradually spreading below, Zephyr, standing on the high platform, did not lose his temper. He only slowly raised his thick, powerful hands, palms down, and pressed them down heavily, signaling for the whole field to remain calm. Quiet. Zephyr's steady and powerful voice instantly reached every corner of the vast playground. He looked at those fearful young people with a determined gaze and told everyone loudly, there was no need for excessive worry. Although this assessment was cruel, all safety boundaries and bottom lines were firmly in the hands of all the instructors present. To deal with this sudden practical combat assessment, Zephyr then decisively announced a major adjustment to today's training plan. Listen up. The theoretical and instructional sessions for the 6 Powers Kami on the original plan are cancelled. For the entire day today, all courses are changed to one-on-one, fist-to-flesh practical combat instruction. As soon as he finished speaking, Admiral Zephyr fiercely tore off the Justice cloak on his shoulders, which symbolized the highest power of the Marines, and tossed it to an instructor nearby. Accompanied by the sound of fabric friction, under his tight-fitting black tank top, 2 arms covered in terrifying muscle lines were instantly exposed. His skin, which had been soaked in armament hockey for years, radiated a suffocating and powerful pressure. Zephyr strode to the edge of the high platform, looking down at everyone from above. Today, every new recruit here will take turns coming forward. Launch unreserved, full-strength lethal attacks at this old man. Do not have any scruples. In battle with you, this old man will personally point out the fatal flaws and deficiencies in each of your moves. Besides this old man, Zephyr pointed to Victor, who was standing to the side with his arms crossed, and the row of cold-faced instructors behind him. You can also freely choose any other instructor present for the highest intensity life and death sparring. Use this as the final sharpening of your skills before the assessment. The playground was silent, with only heavy breathing echoing. Seeing those new recruits below who, although quieted down, still had traces of trepidation and self-doubt in their eyes, Zephyr took a deep breath. His broad chest puffed out high, and then, he suddenly spread his arms and let out a lion's roar. All of you, lift your heads for this old man. Put away your ridiculous weakness and cowardice. The fact that you can stand here shows that you are already geniuses, 1 in 10,000 on the sea. You are all the disciples I am most proud of in my teaching career. Zephyr's voice roared, every word hitting the new recruits' hearts like a war drum, igniting the sparks deep in their blood. This old man believes in your strength without reservation. So, you must also believe in yourselves without reservation. This tag is merged into 87 in the source logic but kept as a placeholder if needed. However, the source text for 88 was empty or merged into 87's sentence structure. To maintain alignment, I will provide the continuation of Zephyr's thought. Tomorrow, on that arena where all eyes are watching, show this old man your full strength without reservation. Use your indestructible fists, use the incomparably sharp blades in your hands, to clearly tell everyone present who underestimates you. Chapter 70, Sakazuki's Submission. Random blind box and the cat fruit. The midday sun scorched Marineford's #1 training ground without mercy, the air shimmering and distorting in the intense heat. However, even more stirring than the sweltering weather was the boiling battle intent of the new recruits on the field. The practical training session for finding flaws officially began. After Admiral Zephyr's blood-pumping and heroic pre-battle speech, the fighting spirit of these young men was completely ignited. They no longer acted timidly before their instructors as they had in the past. Instead, they turned into a pack of howling young wolves, exploding with an unprecedented desire to attack. Among them, many new recruits who considered themselves to have a good foundation in exquisite taijutsu did not line up to wait for Admiral Zephyr's guidance. Instead, they proactively approached Victor, who was standing by the sidelines, for one-on-one sparring. Facing these energetic young fledglings, Victor set aside his usual casual demeanor. He wasn't perfunctory in the slightest, bringing 120% seriousness to this final training session before the exam. Thud. 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 The dull sounds of physical impact echoed continuously across the sandy ground. Victor didn't even use armament hockey, relying solely on his tempered, pure taijutsu. He strolled through the crowd with ease. He effortlessly neutralized the sharp attacks coming from all directions. Then, moving like lightning, he struck with surgical precision, repelling the new recruits one by one. Your punches are too floaty, your waist isn't fully rotated, and there's a disconnect in your force generation technique. Your footwork is too restless. Your base is unstable. If you meet a power-type opponent, your lower body will collapse in an instant. Victor's voice was cold and professional. Every time he pointed out a flaw, it was accompanied by a precise counter-demonstration, leaving the new recruits thoroughly defeated and convinced. And along with this meticulous and high-intensity practical teaching, the system notification sounds in Victor's mind rang out frantically, like a string of firecrackers during the new year. Ding! Guided a new recruit to correct their force trajectory. Gained physique +2 ding. Successfully pointed out a defensive flaw. Gained armament hockey experience +15 ding. Perfectly demonstrated combat techniques. Gained strength +4. The dense reward panels refreshed frantically at the edge of his retina. A massive amount of physique bonuses, hockey experience, and taijutsu proficiency flowed in continuously. Victor felt the surging power filling his body. In this practical teaching session that seemed like a one-sided contribution, he was actually making a fortune. Just as Victor finished guiding a few drenched new recruits and sent them aside to rest and reflect, accompanied by a series of heavy, powerful footsteps, Sakazuki, who had just finished a high-intensity sparring session with Admiral Zephyr on the other side, strode over. The burly, tough man was currently covered in sweat, and white steam was even rising from his bronze skin. He stopped in front of Victor and, without hesitation, issued a challenge to the young Vice Chief Instructor. "Instructor Victor, please grant me your guidance." Victor nodded slightly, a hint of appreciation flashing in the depths of his eyes. The two took their stances on the scorching sand, and a brief but exceptionally fierce clash erupted instantly. Sakazuki did not use the high heat of his magma to burn anything. Instead, he compressed the explosive power of the magma into his fists. Every strike carried a terrifying sonic boom that tore through the air, his momentum daunting. Facing this storm-like fierce offensive, Victor's figure was like a phantom. Still relying on pure taijutsu, he wove through Sakazuki's airtight barrage of punches. After dozens of rounds of probing and clashing, Victor's eyes suddenly narrowed. He took a sudden step forward, his palm cutting with perfect precision into the tiny gap between Sakazuki's crossed arms, stopping steadily an inch before his throat. The wind from the punches came to a dead stop, and the agitated dust slowly settled. Victor withdrew his hand and pointed out Sakazuki's current fatal problem in a sharp tone: "Your strength, spirit, and will are all impeccable. However, you still rely too heavily on the instantaneous explosive power provided by the magma fruit." Victor pointed to the junction of Sakazuki's ribs and shoulder. "This reliance causes an inevitable, subtle opening in your close quarters defense the moment you throw a punch." Seeing Sakazuki's thoughtful and grave expression, Victor continued, "While your current strength is enough to easily handle those impel-down prisoners in tomorrow's assessment, if you look to the future, when you encounter those great pirates in the New World who have cultivated their hockey to the limit, this tiny opening will become a fatal vulnerability that allows an enemy to kill you in one strike." This penetrating analysis struck hard at Sakazuki's heart. Victor looked at him, stepped forward, and patted the tough man's broad shoulder, offering encouragement. "Don't be too hard on yourself, this is an instinctive habit faced by all Logia users. As long as you face it and work hard to correct it in your future training. Sakazuki, remember my words, as long as you fill this shortcoming, in the future, you will surely become the next Marine Admiral to reign over the seas." Hearing Victor's unreserved guidance and that weighty expectation, this future admiral, known for his iron-fisted methods, was now completely convinced and humbled. He stopped his movements, snapped his legs together, stood as straight as an iron tower, and gave Victor a serious bow with a solemn face. "Instructor Victor, I will keep your guidance engraved in my heart. In the arena tomorrow, I will show you the results of my correction. I will not fail your expectations." With that, filled with a more restrained yet even more fiery battle intent, he turned and strode away. Victor stood there, watching his iron-firm back, a satisfied smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Judging by this progress, the time when he would officially take this monster-level rising star as his disciple was not far off. However, just as Victor was calculating his grand plans for the future in his heart, in his mind, the system suddenly burst out with an exclusive reward notification radiating a dazzling golden light, causing him to freeze on the spot. Ding! Detected that the host has completed deep core guidance for the excellent aptitude target, Sakazuki. Target has developed strong feelings of submission. Triggered ultra-rare hidden drop. Congratulations to the host for obtaining random devil fruit blind box ×1. Looking at the treasure chest icon radiating a mysterious halo on his retina, Victor was stunned. He never imagined the system could actually drop something as rare on the seas as a devil fruit. Although he followed a path of pure haki and taijutsu and had no need to eat such a thing, nor did he want to be forsaken by the sea, this item was absolutely a top-tier bargaining chip for cultivating loyal subordinates or winning people over in the future. Even the most ordinary Zoan type was worth a fortune on the black market. Victor took a deep breath and rubbed his hands together like a fly. He prayed with anticipation that he could pull a powerful Logia or a rare mythical Zoan type. He sank his consciousness completely into the system space and decisively clicked the draw button. A virtual golden roulette wheel appeared instantly, the pointer spinning rapidly while dazzling lights flashed, blurring his vision. After a dozen seconds, the wheel's speed gradually slowed down. Under Victor's intense gaze, the pointer passed over various fruit silhouettes. Finally, it stopped steadily on a pitch-black devil fruit covered in eerie spiral patterns. Ding! Blind box opened successfully. Congratulations to the host for obtaining Zoan cat fruit. Hearing the system's cold broadcast and confirming it was just the most ordinary Zoan fruit, Victor frowned slightly. He thought he would get some world-shattering top-tier ability. He didn't expect it to be just a regular cat. On this sea teeming with monsters, the lethality and practical value of this fruit were likely quite mediocre. But the very next second after this disappointing thought arose. In Victor's mind, a perfect candidate suddenly flashed without warning, someone with a voluptuous and graceful figure, usually dignified and cold, yet exceptionally sensible and accommodating. Takayanagi Mihana. A black cat. Tight curves. Furry ears and a tail. Who knows what kind of fun and uniquely tempting images he thought of. Victor's previously furrowed brow smoothed out instantly. The corners of his mouth, completely out of his control, slowly curled into a meaningful, wicked smile. It's a bit weak for fighting, indeed. But if used to increase the enjoyment of certain special battles, this fruit is simply a rare divine tool. While Victor had his eyes closed, deeply immersed in his fruit ability deep modification plan for Madame Takayanagi and unable to extricate himself. Guion had finished her sparring at some point and quietly walked up to him. She tilted her head slightly, her watery eyes sparkling with curiosity as she asked in confusion, "What are you looking at? Standing here all by yourself and smiling so strangely." Victor's thoughts were interrupted. He quickly snapped back to reality, looking at his official girlfriend before him, dressed in a sharp training uniform, valiant and heroic, with a light sweat on her brow. Naturally, he couldn't speak of that lewd modification plan out loud. Victor chuckled softly. He leaned down slightly, leaning close to her ear. "Nothing. I was just thinking. What, has the vice chief instructor also hit a bottleneck? Do you need me, your instructor, to give you a separate private lesson tonight?" Hearing the words private lesson, combined with the man's hot breath on her ear, Guion's brain instantly and uncontrollably associated it with those heart-pounding, even somewhat absurd and wild images. Her face, already rosy from exercise, visibly became even more flushed, as if it were about to drip blood. Like a startled fawn, she hurriedly took half a step back, putting distance between them. To hide her shyness and panic, Guion raised her voice in a cover-up, loudly arguing, "It's swordsmanship. I meant guidance regarding practical swordsmanship. You big pervert with a head full of trash, I'm ignoring you." With that, she turned and left, leaving behind an exceptionally charming and lovely figure. Seeing her cute, duplicitous act, Victor stood there and couldn't help but let out a pleasant chuckle. Time flew by during the intense and fulfilling training. In the blink of an eye, the sun had begun its westward descent, reaching the evening hours. This whole day of high-intensity finding flaws training finally came to a successful conclusion in the glow of the setting sun. The 100 new recruits on the field, though each was exhausted and covered in dust, had eyes that had become even more resolute. After the instructor's physical beatings and guidance, their gains were clearly visible. The aura radiating from them was also much more steady and restrained than in the morning, like blades about to be unsheathed for blood. Admiral Zephyr put his large justice coat back on. Standing on the high platform, he looked at the group of disciples below, whose mental outlook had been completely refreshed, and nodded in satisfaction. Then, in a voice like a great bell, he loudly announced the official end of today's training, telling everyone to hurry to the cafeteria to replenish their strength and rest well for the battle ahead. As the order to dismiss was given, the new recruits left in an orderly line. Victor reached out to straighten his crisp military jacket, smoothing the tiny wrinkles on the hem. With his back to the blood-red, gorgeous setting sun, he leisurely and slowly walked toward the training camp gates. Chapter 71, The Wealthy Merchant's Daughter's Resentment. Catgirl Takayanagi Mihana. Night had fallen deeply, with stars dotting the deep blue night sky over Marineford. After leaving the bustling atmosphere of the new recruit training camp, Victor returned to the instructor's dormitory alone. He took off his eye-catching justice coat and sharp military uniform. He changed into a well-tailored, sophisticated dark casual outfit. These civilian clothes perfectly outlined his tall, broad-shouldered, narrow-waisted physique, adding a touch of masculine laziness and depth. He pushed open the door and vanished into the bustling, noisy night of Marineford as if walking on level ground. Victor navigated several quiet streets with ease and arrived at Madame Takayanagi's hidden mansion deep within the wealthy district. The estate was a sanctuary of peace amidst the city, surrounded by tall, dense evergreens that completely blocked out the outside noise and prying eyes. At this moment, Madame Takayanagi was in her elegantly decorated private study. She wore a wine-red silk nightgown. The high-quality silk fabric was like a second skin, perfectly hugging her plump, mature, and graceful curves. Her slightly open collar revealed a large expanse of fair, creamy skin that shimmered alluringly under the soft wall lamps of the study. With her legs crossed, she leaned lazily against a large, soft leather sofa. Although she held a thick ledger in her hands, her mind was not on the densely packed numbers at all. Under the arrangements of her father, a wealthy merchant with vast financial resources, Kobe had already taken his generous travel expenses and well-placed connections, successfully boarding a warship bound for a remote marine branch to gain experience and steadily gild his resume. Without the ties and worries of her son, she was left all alone in this vast, empty mansion. However, that man who had forced his way into her life and stolen her heart, body, and reason, had not come to visit her for a long time. At the thought of this, a sense of lingering resentment and loss welled up in Madame Takayanagi's heart. To dispel the unbearable loneliness of staying in an empty room, she had no choice but to force herself to find some tedious tasks to do. Currently, she was taking the opportunity to help her father process the complicated business ledgers under the Chamber of Commerce's name. She tried to numb her brain with the abacus and accounts, attempting to divert her attention from the man who filled her thoughts. Click. The heavy solid wood double doors of the study were pushed open silently. There were no sudden footsteps. But a familiar scent, a mixture of light sea salt and premium tobacco, had already reached Madame Takayanagi's nose. This scent, unique to him, had already been etched into her memory over countless lingering nights. Madame Takayanagi suddenly turned her head. When she clearly saw the handsome and profound face of the visitor, the joyful light that had flared in her beautiful eyes suddenly flickered, and she forced herself to stop from standing up. Instead of rushing to greet him like a little woman craving favor, she stubbornly pursed her red, alluring lips. She turned her back in a bit of a huff, deliberately not looking at him, and gave a sarcastic humph. "Oh, did the sun rise in the west today? Colonel Victor, such a busy man like you is quite the rare guest. I thought you had long since forgotten about this place." Looking at the mature beauty before him, who clearly missed him desperately but was acting difficult on the surface, a trace of indulgent and doting amusement flashed in the depths of Victor's eyes. He wasn't angry at the woman's petty temper. He strode to the sofa and opened his broad, powerful arms to her with a smile. Victor stared at her back, his voice deep and husky. "Come over here." Just those 3 words, combined with that magnetic call, they instantly shattered all of Madame Takayanagi's pretenses and defenses. Hearing this, Madame Takayanagi's red lips twitched slightly. She was still muttering complaints about his neglect, but her body, long accustomed to being possessed by him, gave the most honest reaction. She decisively tossed aside the thick business ledger in her hand. Then, like a noble, elegant, yet clingy Persian cat, she leapt lightly from the leather sofa and threw herself into the man's arms without hesitation. Her fair, soft arms tightly encircled Victor's neck. She buried her burning cheek in the crook of his neck, greedily inhaling his scent. Victor tightened his arms in response, steadily supporting her plump waist. The two tumbled onto the soft sofa, becoming entangled together. Without any superfluous words, they unhesitatingly exchanged a deep French kiss. The temperature in the study rose sharply, and only the blushing sounds of their lips and teeth entwining remained in the silent space. The long kiss finally came to an end. Madame Takayanagi's cheeks were flushed, and she leaned weakly against Victor's broad chest, gasping for fresh air. Her charming eyes shimmered, and the resentment in the depths of her gaze had already been dispelled by the deep kiss. Seeing the well-behaved and docile appearance of the beauty in his arms, Victor chuckled, the vibration of his chest clearly transmitted to her. He stroked her long hair with one hand, while the other, like a magic trick, silently pulled an exquisitely crafted dark-patterned wooden box from his coat. Victor placed it gently on the coffee table in front of them and tilted his chin slightly, signaling her to open it. Madame Takayanagi steadied her breathing. With a woman's curiosity, she reached out to unfasten the metal latch of the wooden box and slowly lifted the lid. However, when she clearly saw the object lying quietly inside the wooden box, this wealthy merchant's daughter, who had been knowledgeable since childhood, her pupils suddenly constricted, and she couldn't help but gasp. Lying on the velvet cushion was a fruit with a pure black skin, covered in various eerie and mysterious spiral patterns. Its peculiar shape and the inexplicable magnetic field it emitted all pointed to its extraordinary true identity. Madame Takayanagi's fingers trembled as she reached out. She turned her head and exclaimed in disbelief, "Is this the legendary devil fruit? Victor, where did you get such a priceless treasure?" Even on the underground black market, the starting price for the most common devil fruit is at least a full 100 million berries. Seeing Madame Takayanagi's expression of utter shock, Victor appeared exceptionally calm. He reached out and gently pinched her fair chin. "Don't be so surprised, it's just a common zoan-type cat fruit." His profound gaze fixed on her as he slowly explained his intention. "Your father's chamber of commerce is growing, and as wealth accumulates, more people will target you. As the heir, you will inevitably encounter greedy bandits willing to take risks on this sea. You are a weak woman, and there will be times when I cannot protect you. Eat it and gain the power of the devil fruit. It will significantly improve your ability to protect yourself." Listening to these words, which seemed plain but were filled with consideration for her future, Madame Takayanagi was completely stunned. To casually give away a resource worth over 100 million berries as a mere apology for a long-awaited reunion. This ungrudging favoritism and absolute generosity completely shattered the final line of defense in Madame Takayanagi's heart. Her already charming eyes were now filled with an intense, inseparable tenderness and absolute devotion. Before this man, she was willing to give her everything. Driven by this deep emotion, Madame Takayanagi did not hesitate. Under Victor's encouraging and meaningful gaze, she reached out her slender hand, picked up the pure black cat fruit, closed her eyes, and took a forceful bite of the flesh with her red lips. However, the second she chewed the flesh in her mouth, Madame Takayanagi's beautiful features instantly distorted uncontrollably. A nauseating taste, indescribable in words, like eating moldy socks fermented for 10 years, rushed to her head. This revulsion made her stomach churn. She couldn't help but cover her mouth tightly, nearly gagging on the spot. Seeing the usually dignified and elegant madam making such a comical and wretched face, Victor, who had been watching from the side, finally couldn't help but let out a low, mischievous laugh. Enduring the nauseating disgust, with physiological tears in the corners of her eyes, Madame Takayanagi struggled to swallow the bite of fruit. As soon as the flesh entered her stomach, the magical transformation began. She immediately felt a strange and warm current surge from deep within her body. This warm current followed her blood circulation, spreading through her entire body in just a few seconds. Her heart began to race uncontrollably, the thump-thump sound clearly audible in her ears. Immediately after, her vision and hearing became incredibly sharp in an instant. She could even clearly hear the slight sound of leaves falling in the courtyard outside the window. She could also clearly see the tiny dust on the books in the corner under the dim light of the study. But the changes were far from over. Under Victor's interested gaze, from within Madame Takayanagi's elegantly pinned-up hair, two furry, nimble, and cute pure black cat ears suddenly popped out with a soft bang without warning. The two cat ears even twitched sensitively as her emotions fluctuated. Not only that, a long, soft, and exceptionally flexible black cat tail naturally emerged from beneath the hem of her wine-red nightgown. The tail seemed to have a mind of its own, swaying restlessly in the air. The tail brushed against the edge of the leather sofa, making a faint rustling sound. Feeling the strange sensation in her body, Madame Takayanagi cried out. She hurriedly broke free from Victor's embrace and ran barefoot to the full-length mirror on one side of the study. When she saw herself in the mirror, she was instantly frozen in place. What was reflected in the mirror was still her mature, charming face and plump, alluring figure. But the two furry black cat ears on her head and the long black tail swaying gently behind her completely shattered her original dignified aura. Now, she exuded a natural, blood-pumping charm and laziness from head to toe. Combined with that wine-red silk nightgown, she looked exactly like a charming catgirl stepped out of a myth, radiating a fatal attraction. Seeing this uniquely seductive appearance, Madame Takayanagi's face instantly flushed with shame. The flush spread all the way to her fair neck and the base of her new cat ears. This look was simply too embarrassing. She frantically covered her burning cheeks with both hands, not daring to look back at Victor sitting on the sofa. Even her tail hung stiffly due to nervousness, occasionally brushing against her smooth calves in a flustered manner. Meanwhile, Victor had already slowly stood up from the sofa. He looked at the perfect prey before the full-length mirror who made his heart race, and slowly extended his long fingers. He pulled open the collar of his dark casual wear and tossed his jacket aside. Accompanied by steady and powerful footsteps, Victor, like a lion about to enjoy a feast, slowly approached this freshly transformed, bewildered, top-tier catgirl. Tonight's hunt had only just begun. Chapter 72, The Catgirl on the Desk. I need you. Looking at this naturally seductive and lazy appearance, Madame Takayanagi felt like she would die of shame and indignation. In a panic, she stretched out her fair hands and tightly covered her burning cheeks. She didn't even have the courage to look into the mirror through the gaps in her fingers, let alone look back at the man standing behind her. Victor's tall and straight figure approached from behind. His broad, sturdy chest pressed seamlessly against Madame Takayanagi's smooth and silky back. The physical modification of a Zoan devil fruit is comprehensive. After consuming the cat fruit, Madame Takayanagi's originally human senses were magnified several times at this moment. The man's warm breath sprayed by her ear was like a spring breeze carrying a slight electric current. That steady, powerful heartbeat pressed against her back sounded like a heavy drum booming deep within her eardrums. Even the slight sensation of the fabric of Victor's high-grade shirt rubbing against her skin during subtle movements was infinitely magnified at her nerve endings. This overwhelming surge of acute perception caused waves of numbing tremors to rise uncontrollably throughout her body. Victor looked at the delicate body trembling slightly due to sensitivity before him, a mischievous smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. He slowly raised his hand, his slender fingers accurately pinching the soft cat ear on top of her head that had stiffened due to tension. Ah! Under the man's touch, which seemed to carry some kind of magic. The last trace of rational defense in Madame Takayanagi's heart collapsed completely in an instant, like a dam bursting. Her body instantly softened into a pool of spring water. From deep within her throat, completely uncontrolled by her brain, came a series of purring sounds representing comfort and docility. Her beautiful eyes, which had been covered by her hands, were now flooded with a layer of blurred, misty vapor, the corners of her eyes flushed with a touching peach blossom red. To hide her extremely embarrassing instinctive reaction, Madame Takayanagi bit her red lips and, relying on the extraordinary agility the cat fruit had just granted her, pushed off hard with her legs. Like a truly startled, nimble black cat, she leaped up with an exceptionally light grace. She actually broke free from Victor's dangerous embrace, attempting to flee to the other side of the spacious study. However, this bit of speed she had just acquired was a completely futile struggle before a devil instructor of unfathomable strength. Victor looked at her leaping figure, a hint of playfulness flashing in his eyes. With just a seemingly casual exertion of force from his feet, his figure shifted instantly like a ghost, appearing in front of her landing spot without warning, as if teleporting. "Caught you, my little kitten," accompanied by a low, raspy chuckle. Victor reached out with one arm, domineeringly and precisely grabbing her slender, soft waist. Amidst her exclamation, he lifted her light, delicate body directly into the air. Victor carried her, walking with large strides to the center of the study. Then, he domineeringly and mercilessly pressed her onto the large mahogany desk. With a crisp clatter sound, the neatly arranged business ledgers and expensive ink bottles on the desk were swept aside by Victor's large hand. The ink bottle smashed onto the carpet, the dark ink soaking in, while those heavy ledgers scattered all over the floor. Madame Takayanagi was forced to lie flat on the tabletop. The cold texture of the mahogany desk and the chill brought by the papers and bills that hadn't been swept away yet formed a strong stimulus against her skin, which was currently as hot as fire. In the study, the vintage brass desk lamp emitted a dim, ambiguous yellow glow, just happening to illuminate this space. Under this dim light, the last bit of tsundere pride and reserve in Madame Takayanagi's heart was crushed to pieces. In this intense confrontation filled with primitive wildness and a unique sentiment, she completely abandoned all defenses and pretenses. She reached out her arms and tightly hugged Victor's neck. Wholeheartedly and with a bit of frenzy, she cooperated with the man she both loved and hated before her. The cat fruit not only gave her acute senses but also granted her an amazing flexibility beyond ordinary imagination. High-difficulty movements that were impossible to complete on normal days were now done with ease. And that pure black cattail seemed to have an independent life of its own. As the night deepened, the temperature in the study climbed to its peak, accompanied by a melodious, high-pitched, soft exclamation. That expensive mahogany desk, which had endured immense pressure, finally stopped its inexplicable slight swaying. The air was filled with a hormonal scent so thick it almost seemed tangible. The hearty bout of clouds and rain finally ceased. Madame Takayanagi now looked like a truly and completely tamed, docile little cat. She was drenched in fragrant sweat, lacking even the strength to move a finger, and could only lean tiredly but with immense satisfaction against Victor's broad and sturdy chest. In the past at such times, Victor would usually show a bit of tenderness before getting up, dressing neatly, and preparing to leave. But tonight, not only did he not get up. Instead, he reached out his strong arms and held the soft, delicate body in his embrace tightly, as if he wanted to rub her into his own blood and bone. Victor lowered his head slightly, his sexy thin lips seemingly touching the furry black cat ear on top of her head. In the quiet study, he used the deep voice to softly utter 4 words, "I need you." Hearing these words, Madame Takoyanagi's originally limp body suddenly jolted. Her mist-filled eyes snapped wide open. She raised her head in disbelief, meeting the man's gaze, which was as deep as a vast sea of stars. Victor looked into her eyes, the desire from just now gone from his deep pupils. He no longer hid his deeply buried ambitions from her and confessed his plan with a serious expression. "Marineford has too many rules and too many entanglements. Although I wear the coat of justice, on this treacherous sea, relying solely on overt military power is far from enough. I need a pair of eyes hidden in the shadows, I need a giant net that can cover the 4 seas." Victor's slender fingers gently stroked her cheek, his tone solemn. "I intend for you to step forward, utilizing the vast chamber of commerce connections and funds under your father, Takayanagi Masake's name. In the shadows, help me establish an underground intelligence agency that covers the entire sea." These ambitious words were, for Madame Takayanagi, no less shocking than a magnitude 10 earthquake erupting in her mind. This thorough soul-shaking left her completely stunned. Before this, she had always thought that to this young and promising colonel, she was nothing more than a beautiful vase he had taken by force to vent his vigorous desires. She was a canary that couldn't see the light, only able to cater to him with her body in the middle of the night. But now, when Victor personally entrusted her with this top-secret plan concerning his future hegemony, she finally realized, as if waking from a dream, it turned out that her status in this unfathomable man's heart was actually so significant. She was by no means just a plaything on the bed, but a key player in his future. He truly treated her as a confidant who could fight alongside him and to whom he could entrust his back. Thinking of this, the resentment, loss, and confusion about the future that had accumulated in Madame Takayanagi's eyes for a long time were swept away in an instant. In their place was an incomparably bright, brilliant light, and a deep attachment and frenzy, willing to be shattered to pieces for him. To be needed and relied upon by such a man, what an honor and happiness it was. She reached back and tightly hugged Victor's neck, burying her cheek deep into the crook of his neck. The black cattail behind her swayed happily and firmly. When she raised her head again, the eyes of this wealthy merchant's daughter no longer held the frailty of the past, but instead revealed an unprecedented decisiveness and determination. As long as it is something you want, I will surely get it for you. No matter how difficult, even if I exhaust all the resources I possess, even if I drain every last bit of my wealth and lifeblood. Victor, my body and soul, my everything, belongs to you. In this study filled with the scent of ink and lingering passion, witnessed by the moonlight, a vast underground intelligence network capable of overturning the situation of the entire sea in the future was quietly born amidst this warm fragrance and burgeoning ambition. Chapter 73, The Secret of the Dressing Room. The swaying cat tail and the occupied nest looking at the fluffy, pure black cat ears atop Madame Takayanagi's head as they twitched slightly with her breathing in his arms. And her current charming appearance, completely unguarded, docile, and submissive. The burning fire within Victor's body, which had only recently subsided, was like having a spoonful of hot oil poured onto it. It blazed uncontrollably once more, even more intense than before. He did not hesitate for a second. With a slight exertion of his strong arms, he swept Madame Takayanagi's plump and graceful body off the desk and into a princess carry. Victor took steady, powerful strides with his long legs. He strode purposefully toward her spacious and luxurious private bedroom. While passing through the dim corridor covered with thick wool carpets, Victor lowered his head slightly. He pressed his thin lips against her black cat ears, which had become exceptionally sensitive due to the devil fruit's power, and whispered several shameless words accompanied by his warm breath. Hearing the man's bold and maliciously playful, explicit requests, Madame Takayanagi's already lustful and beautiful cheeks instantly flushed with two burning red clouds, like a sunset sky. Even her newly grown cat ears folded back shyly. She lifted her moist eyes with a mix of coquettishness and helplessness, casting a resentful glance at Victor. However, when Victor pushed open the heavy bedroom door and placed her steadily on the soft carpet, this completely conquered daughter of a wealthy merchant still obediently turned around. She took alluring cat-like steps that had become natural and swaying due to the cat fruit. Twisting her slender waist, she walked straight into the massive walk-in dressing room adjacent to the bedroom. The rustling sound of fabric rubbing together came from the dressing room. A moment later, accompanied by light footsteps, Madame Takayanagi emerged once more. When her current attire became clear, the air in the entire bedroom seemed to freeze. She had changed into a stunningly beautiful and private outfit that perfectly matched her current catgirl status, one that was indescribable. Black lace and semi-transparent gauze intertwined, outlining her proud curves without reservation. The looming beauty was even more lethal than complete exposure. Looking at this charming body that blended seductiveness, laziness, and innate nobility into a flawless whole, even the battle-hardened Victor couldn't help but feel a wave of dry mouth and thirst at this moment. His Adam's apple moved slightly as he swallowed hard in the silent room. How was this even human? This was simply the most triumphant, alluring work of art created with the creator's heart and soul. A dangerous dark light flashed quickly through the depths of Victor's eyes, like a hungry wolf that had locked onto the perfect prey. He gave Madame Takayanagi no chance to continue displaying her beauty or to shyly escape. He stepped forward directly. He reached out with his large, rough palm. Without any warning, he grabbed the black cattail that was swaying restlessly in midair behind her. Madame Takayanagi's entire body shuddered violently, a numbing sensation passing through her like an electric shock. Her legs instantly went weak, and an uncontrollable cry, part shy and part haughty, escaped her throat. "Ah! Master!" This bone-deep, seductive call completely snapped the last string of Victor's rationality. Before Madame Takayanagi could steady herself from the numbness, using the force of his grip on her tail, Victor yanked his arm back, pulling her entire person forcefully into his broad chest. Then, he took advantage of the momentum to throw this irresistible, alluring little wildcat heavily onto the soft, wide double bed in the center of the room. His tall frame pressed down on her without hesitation, like Mount Tai looming over her. An even more intense second round officially began in this luxurious bedroom. Inside the bedroom, the originally dazzling and massive crystal chandelier was casually adjusted by Victor to a warm orange tone that best enhanced the atmosphere. Amidst the swaying light and shadow, two deeply intertwined silhouettes were projected onto the wall. Victor's tall, robust silhouette overlapped tightly with the soft, stunningly curved catgirl silhouette. The two of them seemed intent on crushing each other and merging into one completely. On the large bed, the expensive silk sheets were currently being gripped tightly by a pair of fair, slender, and tender hands. 10 fingernails coated in red polish sank deep into the fabric, clutching the originally smooth sheets into a mess of deep wrinkles. Accompanied by heavy, rhythmic, and powerful movements, the solid wood bed frame began to creak under the overwhelming burden. The air in the room gradually thinned as the temperature climbed steadily, as if every breath was about to ignite. Under that dim light, the lone, pure black cattail that had originally been raised proudly had now become the truest barometer of this violent storm, reflecting the turbulent waves its owner was experiencing. At times, because its strength had been completely drained, it hung limply over the edge of the wide bed. At other times, it swayed frantically in midair. During the violent swaying, the black tail even accidentally swept across the nearby mahogany nightstand. With several thuds, it knocked over a few heavy books that had been placed there, scattering them across the floor. The melodious, seductive sounds of weeping intertwined perfectly with the man's low growls of pleasure. It wasn't until the night grew deep and the night wind outside blew through the treetops in the courtyard, bringing a hint of coolness, that the black cattail, which had been swaying helplessly in midair for a long time, finally stopped moving completely along with a long sigh. As if it had lost all vitality, it slumped weakly amidst the messy silk bedding. The scene shifted. Time had already reached the dead of night when everything was silent. The location switched to the heavily guarded marineford. A tall and upright silhouette, taking advantage of the perfect cover of the thick night, avoided patrols and quietly arrived at the secluded instructor's dormitory area. The newcomer was none other than Guillaume. Since breaking through that layer of their relationship, this usually ice-cold flower of the Navy had developed a taste for it. Tomorrow at noon was the highly anticipated, cruel practical combat assessment against the death row prisoners of Impel Down. Prior to this, her heart was filled with the tension of the unknown battle. She desperately wanted to seek her boyfriend's warm embrace before the exam to find peace of mind and tenderness. Guillaume walked lightly to the door of Victor's familiar dormitory, took a deep breath, and calmed her excited heartbeat. Then, she extended a slender finger and knocked gently on the door 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. However, after waiting outside the door for a long time, aside from the rustling of leaves in the night wind, there was no familiar response from inside. It was so quiet it seemed as if no one was home. Guillaume furrowed her beautiful brows in confusion, a hint of bewilderment flashing in her moist eyes. She muttered to herself in her heart, "Strange, his schedule is usually very regular, he definitely doesn't have the habit of sleeping this early. Could it be that teaching us during the special combat training today was too tiring, so he fell asleep early and can't hear the knocking?" Seeing that the front door remained closed, Guillaume did not intend to give up and leave. Relying on her agile skills, she circled around to the side of the dormitory, a route she knew well. She tentatively pushed the window that was always used for ventilation. As expected, the window was not locked from the inside. She looked around to confirm no one was nearby. With her hands on the windowsill, her posture was as agile and light as a nightingale as she silently flipped into the room. After landing steadily, Guillaume looked around. The room was pitch black, with not a single light left on. There was a faint coolness in the air. Clearly, the room was indeed empty at the moment. Standing in the empty and overly quiet room, Guillaume's brows knitted slightly as she thought seriously for a moment. Tomorrow at noon is such an important special grade practical assessment, involving death row prisoners from Impel Down and high-level observers. There's absolutely no room for error. She reached a conclusion in her heart as if suddenly enlightened. As the vice chief instructor of the new recruit camp, the burden on his shoulders is so heavy. He's probably still out inspecting the layout of the arena overnight. Or maybe he's busy in a meeting room at the headquarters building with other generals, double-checking security details. At this thought, the slight sense of disappointment from finding him gone vanished instantly. Not only did Guillaume not feel angry or complain about her boyfriend's absence, but her heart instead welled up with a deep sense of heartache and understanding. She felt for this officer who silently put in unknown hard work and sweat behind the scenes for the future of these new recruits. This tender emotion dissolved in her heart. Then, Guillaume didn't even bother to take off her clean training uniform and walked toward the bedroom with complete familiarity and a clear conscience. She lay directly on her back on the large double bed that held many sweet memories for the two of them, playing the part of the one who occupied another's nest. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and buried her face deep into the soft pillow. Her nasal cavity was instantly filled with that cold scent unique to Victor. Smelling this incredibly reassuring scent, her nerves, which had been somewhat apprehensive about the life and death assessment coming tomorrow, completely relaxed at this moment. Surrounded by this almost tangible sense of powerful security, a serene and beautiful smile hung on the corner of Guillaume's mouth. She closed her eyes and soon fell into a deep, peaceful sleep on this large bed belonging to her beloved. Chapter 74, The Morning Caterpillar. High ponytail and a girlfriend's responsibility. As the sun first rose, the golden morning light fell like fine, scattered gold leaf, slowly cascading over the shimmering waters of Marineford, silently dispelling the deep darkness that had shrouded the night. The early morning sea breeze carried a hint of coolness and saltiness, blowing through every corner of the fortress. Victor stepped into this first light of dawn, concluding his half-night of deep guidance and preliminary intelligence network planning at Madame Takayanagi's place. With steady steps and a sense of complete satisfaction and refreshment after his release, he quietly returned to the instructor-exclusive dormitory area of the new recruit camp. Click, the brass key turned gently, and the door was pushed open. As soon as he stepped into the entryway, Victor's deep gaze went straight toward the bedroom with its door ajar. He saw that on his originally flat and wide double bed, the soft quilt was currently bulging high in a long, cylindrical shape. The edges of the quilt were tucked tightly underneath, and sleeping inside was a restless caterpillar that would occasionally wiggle twice. At the edge of the pillow, several strands of long black hair were scattered like a waterfall. Seeing this scene, there was no need for any extra perception. Victor's heart had already guessed who this little thief occupying the nest was. A faint smile couldn't help but tug at the corner of his mouth, and a thick sense of indulgence and tenderness welled up in the depths of his eyes. He turned around, his movements slight yet exceptionally decisive as he backhandedly locked the dormitory door tight, isolating any possible outside disturbance. Victor lightened his footsteps, slowly approaching the bedside like an elegant leopard. Considering he had been out for half the night, there might still be a trace of the unique scent from Madame Takayanagi's study on him. In order not to disturb this morning's tranquility, Victor nimbly shed the clothes that were tainted with the complex scents of the outside one by one, casually draping them over the back of a nearby chair. Then, he carefully lifted the corner of the quilt. Carrying the slight chill of the morning along with his own body temperature that was as hot as a furnace, Victor naturally slipped into the bed that carried a faint, delicate fragrance. He reached out his strong arms from behind, pulling that warm, soft, and slightly glowing body tightly into his embrace. This sudden movement and the obvious temperature difference caused Guillaume, who was immersed in a deep dream, to wake up instantly. Her physical instinct reacted before her brain did. The moment she was held, she subconsciously let out a soft cry, "Hoo!" Accompanied by this low, alert shout, her elbow was already reflexively prepared to strike backward. However, in the next instant, that incredibly familiar and reassuring scent entered her nostrils without any resistance. The unique sensation brought by that broad and solid chest was an even more unique anti-counterfeiting mark in the world. This scent seemed to be the most potent sedative. The body of this flower of the Navy, revered by all, which had tensed up instantly, completely softened within 0.1 seconds. Turning back into a pool of spring water, she cast off all her defenses. Guillaume ignored those large, restless hands that had begun to wander as soon as they got into bed. She turned around lazily in the man's arms, pressing her cheek against his chest. She tilted her head slightly, half squinting her hazy, sleepy eyes, and complained with a hint of the softness and nasality unique to someone who had just woken up, "Where did you go in the middle of the night? Half the bed is cold." Facing his girlfriend's half-awake interrogation, Victor's expression remained unchanged, and he didn't even blink. He explained calmly with a smile, "It's nothing, I was just busy with some preparatory work related to today's noon practical combat assessment. After all, it involves death row prisoners from Impel Down, so many security details needed to be confirmed on site once more, which is why I came back late." This excuse was flawless and perfectly reasonable. And Guion, who was currently deeply immersed in a sweet romance and full of absolute trust in her boyfriend, naturally did not look deeper into any of the details behind this excuse. After all, that high-profile and dangerous practical combat assessment was officially starting today at noon. In order to allow the new recruits to face the life-and-death battle in their peak condition, the Fleet Admiral Instructor, Admiral Zephyr, had very rarely granted a special leave for this morning, letting everyone rest and adjust their states in the dorms. Since she didn't have to get up to run laps on the training ground at the sound of the morning bugle as usual, Dion's tensed nerves completely relaxed. She let out a graceful yawn like a lazy kitten, squeezing out 2 physiological tears from the corners of her eyes. Then, she reached out her fair and soft arms, tightly wrapping them around her boyfriend's solid and powerful waist. She leaned most of her body weight over, murmuring like a spoiled child, "Since you're finished with your work, then immediately be my pillow. It's not easy to have a holiday where I don't have to wake up early, yet I was woken up by you bringing in a chill. You have to be responsible for making up for my good sleep." Looking at the defenseless and completely dependent cute appearance of the girl in his arms, Victor's gaze became exceptionally gentle. He tightened his arms, using his broad and majestic body to wrap Guion tightly within his embrace. He softly agreed, "Okay, sleep." However, this morning's silence and warmth did not last long. Just as the two were tightly embracing with their skin touching, because they were pressed so close together, Guion suddenly keenly sensed something awakening on her boyfriend's body. Feeling this startling change, Guion instantly snapped her eyes open, the last trace of lazy sleepiness remaining in her mind was swept away at this moment. A layer of rippling and charming mist quickly clouded her beautiful eyes, and the temperature of her cheeks began to climb steadily. She naturally knew what that was. Guion gently bit her moist and beautiful red lips and looked up, her gaze flowing with a naturally born coquettishness. She spoke softly, deliberately using a tone filled with teasing and playfulness, "Really, the superior's desires are also this terrifying in the morning." Facing his girlfriend's bold teasing, Victor not only lacked any embarrassment or restraint from being exposed, he let out a light chuckle, his deep voice ringing above her head. Then, he lowered his head slightly, deliberately leaning close to her sensitive earlobe, and countered mercilessly, "Oh? You think I'm terrifying? Then why did you run over here in the middle of the night without saying a word to sleep in my bed? Was it because you were sleepwalking and got lost that you accidentally came to my room? I wonder who was so impatient to deliver themselves to my door." This kind of rogue teasing that directly punctured her little thoughts made Guion's already flushed cheeks instantly turn as red as a ripe tomato. What nonsense are you talking about?" In a mix of shame and annoyance, Guion wrinkled her beautiful nose in dissatisfaction. She used her fuzzy head with force, like a little beast with its fur standing on end. She unceremoniously bumped against Victor's chin, which had a bit of dark stubble, venting the shame and indignation in her heart. Then, she propped her hands on the bed, her waist suddenly exerting force as she broke free from Victor's warm embrace and sat up decisively. The morning sun shone through the window lattice, perfectly falling on her smooth and fair back, gleaming with a charming and healthy luster. Sitting on the bed, Guion casually took off a spare black hair tie from her slender, snow-white wrist. She tilted her head back slightly, her fingers flying as nimbly as butterflies weaving through flowers, quickly gathering her smooth long hair that was scattered over her shoulders like a black waterfall. With a simple and exceptionally crisp movement, she tied it into a high ponytail at the back of her head. This seemingly ordinary action radiated an unparalleled charm at this moment. Tying up the high ponytail not only unreservedly revealed her slender, snow-white, and swan-like graceful neck, but it also vividly displayed the heroic and capable spirit she possessed as a top-tier swordsman. And within this strength and valiance, because of her currently unclothed state, it exuded a kind of blood-pumping charm and fatal attraction. These two completely different temperaments blended perfectly in her, being breathtakingly beautiful. After nimbly tying her ponytail, Guion showed no shyness. She propped one hand on the mattress and did a graceful, light flip. Then, she leaned down slightly, pressing both hands on Victor's chest, looking down at the man lying on the bed from above. In those autumn water-like beautiful eyes, a light filled with the desire for conquest flickered. The corners of her mouth slowly curled into a confident and incredibly charming arc. Don't misunderstand. I'm only doing this to fulfill my responsibility as a girlfriend before the battle. Of course, if the superior insists on saying I only got here because I was lost, then just consider it as me being lost. This duplicitous yet soul-hooking sophistry, combined with her current high and mighty sitting posture, was simply the strongest test of a man's sanity. After saying this, she didn't give Victor any chance to speak or refute. Guion suddenly lowered her head, carrying a sense of determination and passion, and actively kissed Victor fervently. Red lips met, and their teeth and tongues intertwined. All words turned to ashes in this fiery clash. The dark fire in the depths of Victor's eyes exploded. He reached out his broad and powerful hands, grabbing her slender and soft waist. He turned passive into active, instantly seizing absolute dominance of this battle. Soon, along with bursts of the sound of fabric rubbing that would make one's face flush, the white waves of the quilt began a violent rolling and surging on the wide bed. Inside the quiet instructor's dormitory, everything was thoroughly ignited once again. This hearty morning exercise to relieve pre-battle pressure continued for an unknown amount of time in this locked bedroom. It wasn't until the sun outside had completely risen and the golden sunlight had thoroughly covered the entire island of Marineford, announcing the imminent arrival of noon on the assessment day, that this fierce clash finally came to a slight halt with a high-pitched, long sound. Chapter 75, The Underground Arena and the Beasts Uncaged. After a full morning of rest, and the baptism of a hearty, special morning exercise in the dormitory with a certain flower of the Navy. At high noon, the sunlight was completely shut out by heavy steel gates. 100 elite new recruits of the first term, fully armed, assembled neatly within the vast and chilly underground special-grade arena of Marineford. Among the crowd, Guion was particularly eye-catching. Her waterfall-like black hair was tied high into a sharp ponytail, swaying slightly with her steady breathing. Nurtured by both love and sweat, she had shed the occasional tenderness she used to show on ordinary days. Her entire being was like a peerless famous sword wiped bright, exuding an unstoppable, sharp edge from the inside out. At the other end of the boundless arena, over a dozen massive iron cages made of special deep-sea steel stood tall. The thick steel bars were covered in dried dark red bloodstains and mottled rust. Inside the cages, hundreds of death row prisoners from Impel Down were packed together. They were ragged and skinny as skeletons, yet they exuded a dangerous aura. These desperate outlaws were like wild beasts that had been starved for 10 days and were about to fall into madness. Their bloodshot eyes stared fixedly at the new recruits opposite them, the depths of their gaze radiating a greedy and ferocious light like hungry wolves. A nauseating, thick smell of blood, mixed with the tyrannical hostility bred from years of never seeing the sun, rushed toward them like a physical force. This terrifying atmosphere, belonging only to a true Shura field, made many new recruits facing such real killing intent for the first time turn pale. They secretly swallowed hard, and the palms of their hands holding their weapons even seeped cold sweat. Directly above the arena was a towering spectator stand isolated by bulletproof glass and heavy armor. At this moment, on the leather seats of the stand, Fleet Admiral Kong, Admiral Sengoku, Marine Hero Garp, and new recruit Camp Fleet Admiral Instructor Zephyr sat side by side, like four insurmountable mountains. These four living legends represented the highest combat power and wisdom of Marineford. Even if they just sat there quietly, without deliberately releasing haki. The invisible pressure radiated by the four of them, accumulated through mountains of corpses and seas of blood, still made the air in the entire vast underground space incredibly heavy, pressing down until people could hardly breathe. Sengoku's expression was grave as he extended a finger clad in a white glove and slowly pushed up the glasses on the bridge of his nose. His deep gaze watched the somewhat nervous new recruit formation below, and he turned to Zephyr beside him, saying in a low voice, "Zephyr, releasing serious criminals from Impel Down in batches, and using them directly as whetstones for new recruits, this is a first since our marine was founded." The higher-ups took quite a large public relations risk to pass this resolution. I hope this batch of little guys you've spent the last half-month painstakingly teaching won't disappoint us old bones. Hearing his old comrade's warning, Zephyr's broad chest puffed out slightly. He crossed his arms over his chest, let out a cold snort from his nose, his eyes full of absolute trust and pride for this group of disciples. Just watch, Sengoku. The disciples I personally trained are by no means flowers in a greenhouse. Today, they will use the filthy blood of these impel-down scumbags to clearly prove the value of their existence to the headquarters. While the two legends on the high platform were talking. Step, 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 accompanied by the steady and rhythmic sound of military boots hitting the ground. A tall and upright figure slowly walked into the center of the arena from the dark passage. It was Victor. Today, he wore a crisp, spotless white senior Marine officer uniform. Behind him, the large justice cloak with the word justice printed on it billowed in the cold air with his composed steps. At his waist hung a long, slender, and precious saber, positioned properly. Victor's face was cold, and his pace seemed slow but was actually fast. The tempered killing intent radiating from him was actually heavier than that of the murderous pirates in the iron cages. The death row prisoners who had been roaring frantically all fell silent in unison. Victor came to a halt in the center of the field. He slowly raised his head, his dark and deep gaze sweeping across the rows of massive steel cages. Then, in a cold voice devoid of any emotional fluctuation, he announced the cruel rules of this game to the death row prisoners inside. Scum of Impel Down, listen up. The High Command has ordered that as long as you can kill all 100 Marine new recruits across from you here today. Victor paused slightly, his voice like a demon tempting one to fall. At the harbor outside the gate, there is a fast ship loaded with fresh water and food supplies. As long as you can survive until the end, that ship will be yours to sail freely out to sea. Freedom? Hearing these two words, which sounded like heavenly music to the death row prisoners. Those pirate prisoners, who had been tortured into listlessness, instantly fell into complete madness. Their eyes turned blood red in an instant, and their reason was completely burned away by the fanatical desire for freedom. They frantically rammed their bodies against and shook the thick steel bars, letting out bursts of bloodthirsty roars like 100 beasts on the prowl. Kill! Kill those Marine brats! Freedom is mine! No one else better try to take it! They opened their mouths full of yellow teeth, saliva dripping down their chins. They wished they could break through the cage immediately and tear these little Marines, who looked fair and tender to them, into pieces and eat them alive. Facing the pirates' hysterical barking and overwhelming malice, Victor didn't even frown. He just glanced at them as if looking at dead men, and then, his large hand with distinct knuckles slowly gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. Jean. Accompanied by a crisp and high-pitched dragon's cry, the long sword was unsheathed. Under the dim and cold lights of the arena, the blade instantly flashed with a bone-chilling light that made one's entire body turn cold. Victor didn't have any extra charging movements, he just swung the sword extremely casually toward the void in front of him. Swish! A massive, materialized sword chi in the shape of a half-moon instantly tore through the air along the way, sweeping out with a force that could crush anything in its path. Only several consecutive deafening bangs of metal snapping, bang, 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 were heard. All the massive steel chains locking the outside of the cages, as thick as a thigh, were simultaneously cut in half like fragile tofu before this sword chi. The steel doors, now without restraint, were slammed open under the frantic pushing of the pirates inside. Oh! Kill all these little Marines! Seize the ship and go to sea! Accompanied by a hysterical roar from one of the pirate leaders with a bounty of tens of millions of berries. Hundreds of completely red-eyed outlaws surged out like a bursting black tide. They brandished crude iron tools and chains they had snatched from the underground prison. With undisguised real killing intent and a frantic desire for freedom, they charged madly toward the formation of 100 new recruits 100 meters away. In the face of this mountain-toppling charge, Victor's figure flashed like a bolt of white lightning, instantly leaping onto the top of a towering, massive stone support pillar in the center of the field. He stood tall on top of the pillar, hands resting on his sword hilt, looking down from a height at the two tides of people about to collide violently. The justice cloak behind him fluttered in the turbulent air, like an unyielding flag. Amidst the sky-shaking shouts of killing, Victor's gaze pierced through the noise and dust below, meeting briefly with Guillaume, who was equally high in battle spirit among the new recruits. Then, Victor withdrew his gaze. He drew a deep breath, and his voice, which carried an endless sense of solemn killing, instantly drowned out all the roars and echoed throughout the sky above the underground arena. The assessment officially begins. Chapter 76, Baptism of Blood. Lava roar in the thorny crabapple as the reinforced steel gates swung wide open. Hundreds of death row prisoners from impel down, like hungry wolves breaking free from their chains, slammed into the new recruit phalanx like a black mudslide. These desperate criminals exuded unreserved, genuine killing intent, mixed with a nauseating, thick stench of blood and sour body odor, instantly sweeping through the entire underground arena. For these ordinary new recruits who had been training step by step in a greenhouse environment, this overwhelming sense of terrifying pressure caused their brains to go blank and stiffen for an instant. In one corner of the formation, a male soldier whose physical technique scores were usually among the best blocked a pirate's slash by instinct. However, when he had the chance to throw a counterpunch, he looked at the other's hideous face. The hand he used to clench his fist trembled unhelpfully, and a hint of hesitation flashed through his heart. In that half-second of hesitation during a life-and-death struggle, the battle-hardened pirate immediately seized the opening. With a sinister grin, he suddenly pulled a dagger glowing with an eerie green light from his waist and thrust it toward the soldier's throat from a tricky angle. The aura of death instantly enveloped him, the soldier's pupils shrank, and he closed his eyes in despair, waiting for death. Bang! In the nick of time, a sharp whistling sound exploded over the arena. A common pebble, found anywhere, flew down from above at a terrifying, chilling speed. Like a sniper bullet leaving the barrel, the pebble not only accurately shattered the poisoned dagger instantly, but its residual kinetic energy also pierced right through the pirate's left wrist, sending a spray of blood flying. The pirate screamed, clutching his severed wrist as he rolled on the ground in agony. The soldier, having narrowly escaped death, felt his legs go weak and slumped to the ground, gasping for air. Victor still stood firmly atop that towering stone pillar, his justice cloak fluttering loudly in the turbulent air. He looked down upon the chaotic battlefield below. Hesitation means death. This is a real battlefield, not a playground for you to play house. Mercy to them is cruelty to yourself and your comrades. Put away your ridiculous pity. If there's a next time, I won't wait for the pirates, I'll send you on your way myself. This shout, filled with killing intent, was like a heavy hammer, violently waking up the dazed new recruits. Unlike those soft-hearted ordinary new recruits who still felt fear upon entering the battlefield for the first time, Sakazuki, standing at the very front of the line, had his eyes wide open, burning with the flames of absolute hatred for evil. Facing over a dozen burly pirates armed with sharp blades charging at him, he didn't flinch at all, nor did he make any unnecessary movements. Trash that doesn't deserve to live. Truly disgusting. Sakazuki let out an earth-shattering roar. In the blink of an eye, his arms transformed into boiling, surging dark red magma, and the surrounding air was instantly distorted by the terrifying heat. Great eruption. He swung his right fist violently, and a massive fist-shaped shadow made of scorching magma erupted like a volcano. The terrifying torrent of magma, carrying a world-destroying power, completely swallowed the dozen or so pirates in front of him. The prisoners didn't even have time to scream. Under the heat of over 1,000 degrees, they were instantly turned to ashes that scattered in the wind, leaving only a bottomless charred trench on the ground. This cruel, efficient way of killing that left no remains deeply shocked everyone present. On the high platform, Fleet Admiral Kong and Admiral Sengoku, who had been watching the battle, nodded in unison as they looked at the figure below who resembled a demon god born of fire. In this powerful and iron-fisted young man, they clearly saw the brilliant shadow of the Marines' future hardline faction. Arara, how scary. Sakazuki is as hot-tempered as ever. On the other side of the battlefield, Borsellino, wearing tinted sunglasses, sighed helplessly with a tone of laziness. With his hands in his pockets, he didn't even look directly at the charging enemies, merely raising a finger casually. A brilliant golden cross of light flickered at his fingertip, and a barrage of lethal laser beams shot out. He unhurriedly cleared out the pirate lackeys trying to get close, triggering a series of violent explosions. Shifting focus to another part of the battlefield. Amidst the chaotic slaughter, two vicious swordsmen with bounties of several million berries, with their sharp eyes, targeted the beautiful and graceful Guillaume in the crowd. They glanced at each other, their lips curling into synchronized, greedy, and lewd smirks. Wielding blood-stained broadswords, the two moved in tandem from the left and right to flank the isolated Guillaume. Facing the two heinous pirates, Guillaume's stunningly beautiful face showed no sign of panic. She gripped her hilt, her breathing steady, her beautiful eyes radiating a cold, murderous aura. Just as the two heavy broadswords whistled through the air, about to strike her slender body in the nick of time, Guillaume's long, firm calf muscles suddenly exerted force, her toes tapping the ground dozens of times in rapid succession. Bang! A dull sonic boom suddenly erupted from where she stood. She perfectly utilized the physical technique she had learned under Victor's guidance over the past few days, executing a near-perfect sorrow. Her figure instantly turned into a blurred afterimage, vanishing into thin air. This caused the pirate's sure-kill pincer attack to miss completely, their broadswords slamming into the hard stone floor and sending sparks flying. What? Where is she? The two pirates were struck with horror. Before they could regain their senses, a faint scent of crabapple blossoms drifted behind them. Appearing behind the enemies, Guillaume's beautiful eyes held not a shred of mercy or warmth. Her sword unsheathed in an instant, accompanied by a crisp ring. The sharp swordlight, like a cold and bright sliver of moonlight, ruthlessly cut through the dim and oppressive underground space. The two pirates' movements instantly stiffened. In the next second, geysers of blood erupted. A single slash to the throat. Clutching their spurting necks, their eyes filled with unbelievable terror, the two fell straight down. A few drops of warm blood splattered onto Guillaume's snow-white cheeks. Combined with her cold and murderous expression, those crimson spots were like a bloody crabapple flower in full bloom, seductive, stunning, yet lethally dangerous. Having successfully counter-killed them, Guillaume gripped her slightly trembling hilt, her chest heaving as she panted softly. She instinctively looked up, across the chaotic and bloody battlefield, toward the tall figure standing on the high stone pillar. Victor still maintained his commanding posture. But his originally stern gaze softened imperceptibly when it met his girlfriend's eyes, which held a hint of pride and a desire for praise. He nodded slightly, giving her an affirmative response. Just as the two completed this brief and tacit exchange of glances across the noisy battlefield, a terrifyingly powerful and chilling aura suddenly emanated from the massive steel corridor at the deepest part of the arena. Accompanied by footsteps as heavy as mountains, the leader of the impel-down prisoners, Giant Axeline, who had a bounty of 29 million berries and a natural talent for monstrous strength, he stepped over the severed limbs and wails of the pirate lackeys, slowly walking out. His figure was as tall as an iron tower, his muscles knotted, dragging a massive rusty iron hammer in his hand. The vicious leader twisted his thick neck, his joints making a series of loud cracking sounds. His eyes, filled with violence and bloodlust, scanned the battlefield. Finally, his gaze locked onto the stunning girl not far away who had just shown her prowess, her cheeks still stained with blood. Guillaume. That's it for today. Meet you in next part.